Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorinquiry, my interview series here on my side channel. And my guest for this one is going to be Jack Peach. And he is a dating coach and himself someone who's used these methods. He's a husband, a father. Right, to start out with, Jack, one of the areas that I want to set the table on this discussion is, I actually think this is one of the most maligned areas of human life, like society, is the notion of people who either as a job coach men to date women and give them tips, etc. I would say even just people who give advice for free on the internet. It seems to be a pretty consistently and easily maligned aspect. Like essentially it's always, the way it tends to be presented is either you're like creepy and weird for doing this, like, because if you notice, if the angle is a certain type of woman who doesn't like what they think is this type of man, I already envision they're thinking of like a sleazy guy, and they're thinking he's trying to, like, you know, spit a line at them that tricks like a young vulnerable girl who doesn't understand. So essentially I think there's so much misinformation, and I think unfortunately maybe the worst elements of this sphere drag down the perception of what's possible. Because one thing I wanted to start out with is essentially, let's lay the case. Like, why is it important that men, in this case, obviously me and you are men, so we can talk from that perspective. Why is it important that men can talk to women, that men can navigate relationships and have techniques? Why is it important?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's your experience of life, really. I mean, when you think about the things that really matter in life, beyond, you know, getting your basic needs met in terms of, you know, earning a certain amount of income, having housing, being safe and secure, really, some of the most important things that come in life are things like your health, your relationships, and the deeper connections you have with community and things like that. And unfortunately, there's kind of this perception that every man should be able to do this kind of innately,
yes,
without any experience. And it's, if you don't have that success, you are maligned or you're an outcast from society, basically. You can basically see it in the most obvious kind of phrasing around words like incel, right? Which now is just the amount of times I get that on basically any time I write anything, which obviously is completely ironic. I'm married. I have two sons. Like, it'd be pretty weird if I was an incel and have two sons.
The thing is, though, I've noticed, you've probably observed this as well, mate. The actual way that word is used isn't even for the specific definition that they would say the word has. It's essentially just used to say weirdo, right? Because as you say, they'll throw it at you even if they know it's factually not the case, because the angle is they just want other people to not look into it and go, oh, he's an incel, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the ironies that it's used as an insult because the thing about insulting someone about being an incel actually speaks to the very reason why you need people like me, is because people understand that your sex life and your relationships are basically integral to the way that you view yourself. Yes. And that if you're not having good relationships or you're not having sex, you are therefore a low status individual. So the fact that this is even an insult shows why there is a need for people like me to help men who have problems in these areas start to get success, start to have better self-image, start to hopefully get into a relationship. Because like you mentioned before, there is a kind of this like sleazy element or this perception of sleaze associated with dating coaching. And that, you know, like everything in life, there's a certain amount of truth to that, right?
Yes.
There are some elements of the dating scene, people even that, you know, people I'd even probably consider my friends, people who have supported my content, who do have that kind of vibe, right? Where there is kind of this element of manipulation associated with it.
I mean, let's be real. One angle, Jack, you know this, is like some of it is a conscious choice as well. Like some of them, I would just say they're sort of taking the shortcut to quick success in your field, which is they know, since you're often talking, funnily enough, to the type of person who might end up being an incel, someone who's frustrated, they've got access to the internet, they're a young man, but they don't know how to talk to girls. They're the sort of people they're the guys, it's the equivalent of the get rich quick scam, right? They're the ones sort of say like, look, you don't have to really like learn who you are, learn how to communicate, learn about women. Basically, spit these lines at them and say it in this way and act cool like me and do a bad version of LARPing as me, and you might get lucky and get lit. They're almost selling that guy angle, right? And by the way, I'd even just say quickly, I'll throw it back to you, don't worry. I'd just quickly say, if anyone looks in an area and sees there are bad actors, this might sound counterintuitive, but if there are a lot of them, but they're all at the bottom of the industry, that actually implies there is real value and real techniques in the industry, which is why they've come along to do a scam version of it. if you get my premise. Like, if there wouldn't be any Ponzi schemes, if there were no real investments and real stock market and things like that, like everyone would know the whole space is a scam. So as weird as it sounds, actually things that are legit attract scammers who almost like in the animal kingdom mimic the real thing with a fake version, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, this is one of the problems I have, because people who need help in this area can be vulnerable people. Now, not everyone I work with is a vulnerable guy who's like never had sex or something, who is a virgin. I have worked with guys like that. A lot of guys who work with me are actually very successful men who just haven't got this one area of their life sorted out.
Yes.
That's kind of, I'd say probably, 60 or 70% of the guys I work with,
By the way, that doesn't even surprise me, mate, because if I think about it, you nailed it at the beginning, because it's just assumed that if you're cool or normal, all these dreaded words, it's just assumed you'll know how to talk to people and be socially aligned. I imagine the problem those people face is they are very, very successful in their particular area of business or work, and then it's just assumed that they must have this transfer in the other area. They must be equally good there, which is like, unfortunately, it's just like a mistake how humans judge each other. But I can imagine it must be quite embarrassing for them, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because it is central to the way you view yourself. Like the way that you interact with women is very, very central to a man's self-image, rightly or wrongly, it just is. And when you're not having that success, because the set of skills that will take you far in business often can be the exact set of skills that will set you back in a relationship as well.
Right.
In business, there is kind of this, especially in kind of like high-end corporate culture, right? There's a very much, it's kind of like, I've got to get mine. And like, I've sometimes got to screw some people over.
Yes.
A bit hard-nosed. It's very much kind of zero sum. And the communication style you have to be successful in those environments is going to be different to the communication style that you have to be successful with women and in a relationship, especially. A big part of that is, men in general, we are more logical. Successful men in particular are more logical, are more analytical, are more focused on the way that you really, the kind of the external truth and kind of figuring out an exact plan.
Yes.
And like there is this reality that is kind of separate from me, and therefore I have to live in alignment with this reality, and I have to, plot a path that means I can achieve my goals in a very linear kind of way. Whereas women do think differently. Obviously we're talking in generalities here, and
sure.
But generally, women, for what they feel right now, that is the most important thing to them. And
absolutely,
this is why you get kind of as society has become more feminized, things like your truth, right? The whole concept of your truth in kind of political discourse is a feminine way of looking at the world.
Yes.
Whereas men have a much more kind of there is an objective truth that is separate from me, and I have to find that path. And successful men, as I say, in particular, will particularly have more of a focus on that in my experience, because that's what leads you to do well in corporate life, in a business or whatever else. And sometimes being able to then transition out of that and have a different kind, put on a different hat, as it were, and communicate in a different way can be very difficult if you haven't kind of fell into those skills as a young guy, because this will be like, particularly be the case with guys who focus primarily on career when they're younger, right? There is this kind of thing where it's okay, you put women to one side because you need to, they're a distraction. You need to focus on, making yourself in the world first. And there's an element of truth to that. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive, by the way, but if you're in a relationship, that will suck some element of time. Sure, you can't go all in 100% into something. But that means if you then never set that time apart, and suddenly, you're 25, 26, and you're like, hang on a minute. All my friends are kind of, if they're not in serious relationships, they're starting to get in them. They've had relationships, and I feel like this element of my life has like fell behind. It's like, okay. And then sometimes they'll throw themselves into things like online dating, and which can be an absolute, that can be a real grind.
Sure.
You don't know what you're doing, and kind of, the constant swiping and seeing different women and not maybe getting the success, and it can get very draining for men, especially with the dopamine hits associated.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So there's this image of guys who kind of live in their basement, who, just live in their basement, live in their mums, and they've never had sex. And these are the guys that work with me. Now, generally they're not, because if they live in their basement, they probably can't afford to work with me in all honesty. But also, like, there is an element of like it's not just that at all.
Sure.
Right? It's not even close to that. It might even be, especially with what I do, because what I do is I'm looking to get guys into relationships.
Yes.
Because I don't think, like, I've done the casual sex thing. You know, I grew up in Britain as a kid. I partied around and, you know, did all the rest of it. And it's not satisfying. And I don't think you have to go through that experience to realize that it's not satisfying. I think, you know, culture promotes that.
Well, you can learn from other people, of course. Yeah, it's the mistake we make.
Exactly. And sometimes it can be, you know, you can learn a lot doing that, right? I'm not saying it's necessarily all bad. But I think ultimately, even going through that kind of, you know, one night stand culture or kind of casual relationship culture, at some point, I think everyone wakes up to the fact that it is pretty meaningless.
Yeah, actually, let me just jump in a bit and I'll transition it to the next part, which is what you were about to talk about, like long-term relationships. I would actually say as well, from my own experience, one of the reasons I was interested to talk to you and I've been interested in this topic is, like a lot of people, I was a nerd guy who didn't have very good social skills and put all his talent stack into some obscure, abstract video game thing that had no effect on women whatsoever. And quite frankly, if anything, was a negative when he attempted to interact with them. And basically, like a lot of people, I was initially drawn in by the idea of, like, well, I would like when I go out clubbing or go to a bar with my friends to be able to talk to a girl, to maybe sleep with a girl. You know, like a lot of people, I had the very simple goals. And as you alluded to, obviously society flexes the idea that the cool guy's the one who just sleeps with all the women and has everyone after him. But what I will say is I totally agree with you. What I actually found very, very quickly, actually, once my skills got to the level where I could talk to women, hold a conversation, get the dates, eventually sleep with them, was I did a couple of years. I mean, I literally went to South Korea because I had this other interest because of esports. And I had my bachelor years there. And here's the problem. On some level, it was fun, but I often give the analogy, actually, it's a little bit like any kind of addiction. It's like once you start doing it, oftentimes, like the second you don't have whatever the addiction is, you're just going to feel like empty. And then also you oftentimes have that vibe of like, you're really just chasing the image of like the best possible time you had. You're not really getting each time an amazing experience. Like one of the things you'll know, which is doesn't get shown in the movies with all the glamour, is it's incredibly awkward to have most of these scenarios. Even when it's fun, there might be an awkward moment the next day, or when people sober up, or when you see the person again, or when they send you a message, but maybe it was meant to be a one-night stand. Like, and I'll just throw in there the other part that, as someone who was using these skills and these experiences to learn social skills, and especially to learn more about women and how they think and how they communicate, I have to say, mate, my observation was most of the women seemed like they'd been tricked by something societally, or like they had an image that I could just see on, like, look, here's the thing, mate. Obviously, people could dunk on me now and go, it's just because you were bad, you're rubbish at dating. I'll just say, like, this wasn't just me, mate. I would look at my friends, other people who were in these circles, and I just got the vibe the women themselves weren't getting satisfaction from this, mate. Like anything they were getting was fleeting too. And quite frankly, a lot of them seemed like, even when they would sort of put on the brave face of like, yeah, this is just a one night stand, like I love to party, like, you know, I'm an independent person, I could almost see there was a twinge of, they were sort of like, is this not really going to go anywhere? I'm not going to see you again. I could almost see there was nearly always something like that. I could see they weren't satisfied, if you know what I mean. So to me, to bring it back, it might seem like it's often presented by the more sleazy angle in the pickup artist community of like, essentially like a long-term relationship is almost like retirement for dating. It's like, no, if anything, the not one night stands and the dating are practice to actually have a really good long-term relationship, which, as you're saying, is one of the primary experiences of human life as far as we can tell, right?
Yeah, I mean, every society in all of history has had some form of, you know, marital relationship. Like one of the things that I like to look for is like, what are universals within society, all societies, whether it's industrial, whether it's, you know, a traditional, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in you know, America, wherever it might be. Every society, whether it's a tribal hunter-gatherer society, whether it's a, you know, Christian-based society, whether it's a Confucianist society, wherever it is in the world, everyone has some kind of marriage ceremony. There's a reason for that. Like now, it might not be exactly the same. There might be, you know, there's differences between monogamy, there's differences in polygamy, and also, you know, in some societies, divorce is much more normalized. But the fact that marriage is always a thing speaks to how important pair bonding is to humans, full stop. It's the same thing, like, you know, every culture has a culture around eating. You know, it makes sense,
sure.
Right? We need to eat. You go to any culture in the world, you can connect with people via food, right? It's just because it's something we will share. right? And marriage is another of these things. Funerals, it's another one. The importance of death. I mean, the birth of a child. Every culture has, rituals around these events because they're integral to the human experience. Now, when you then detach people from those and you tell them things like, marriage is a prison, or, words to that effect, other kind of ideas around that.
Or you'll be a slave to your husband or whatever, all that terminology, yes.
And vice versa, right?
Yeah.
Like
or it's the ball and chain,
home, right?
Exactly. Or an anchor.
The old ball and chain, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all aimed at disconnecting you from something which is absolutely integral to the human experience. And, you mentioned as well, like in the pickup community and, pickup artistry is like, often that can be a stepping stone to this deeper thing. And I think in that scenario, like when I'm working with guys, I don't, say you only date a girl if you're going to marry her. Like, sure. Obviously not. You've got to be able to get the skills up. You've got to meet a few people to figure out whether, what you want.
Yes.
And, just get the skills, get some practice in, so that when you do meet the right person, you don't F it up. But if you then get locked into that, which whether you're a man or a woman, I do think there is a slight difference between the way that men and women kind of relate to sex based on kind of biological
for sure,
principles. Yeah. But when you get locked into that cycle where you never get out of that bachelor stage, or if you're a woman and you just constantly having one night stands, eventually it does kind of erode part of your soul, I think, if it's done enough.
Yes.
It's like you kind of, that's why where you're referring to, maybe sleeping with a girl, and then you can kind of sense there's that kind of disappointment, or that little kind of like, there's just something in the eyes that tells you there's a little bit of, something behind this that's not comfortable.
Like my analogy would be, when you go to the cinema and you go to see a movie, but the movie itself's just like an all right, it's whatever, you don't mind watching it. But then you see a trailer for an amazing movie beforehand. Everyone has the same vibe, I'm sure I do, which is like, I wish I was watching that movie. But then it's like, no, but I have to watch this one now. That's almost the vibe you get. Like you can tell they might even have tricked themselves that they just wanted a one night stand, but then maybe actually they like you because of it, or maybe it went better than expected, or maybe who knows what, or maybe it's not even about you. Maybe in the morning they just think, why haven't I got a long term relationship? There's a million factors, but I always got that vibe. I wonder if you had a similar experience.
Yeah, for sure. I think for a lot of people, it's that, like we mentioned previously, is what you're told is what you're supposed to do. Or at least you've got to like taste it first. But
yes,
for a lot of people, like I do think there are biological determinants behind this as well. There's a certain guy who's in the news often who's kind of aligned with this thing. He's in prison at the moment in a Romanian cell. I don't know if he's, Andrew Tate, who's associated with this scene, right? Historically came out of this.
Sure, of course, yeah.
And he's obviously a household name now, but for people like him, who he very much is into, kind of polygamous relationships, not settling down.
Yes.
Like I do actually think there is almost a biological determinant behind some men being much more kind of promiscuous.
I mean, that definitely has a historical precedent if you look in society. It's why here's the thing that I think is confusing though. I actually do get the vibe, again, from just knowing more and more people of my life and getting to do a lot of interviews and talk to people. I even get the vibe though, a lot of the people that think those guys are really cool are the ones who haven't got these skills and are the losers, and they're sort of idealizing them, Like a lot of the people in the middle, or who have their own skill set, they might like respect aspects of it, or they can see that's, but it feels like that fawning element does, that's why actually there is a sort of a messed up symbiotic relationship between those figures and the people who would be considered the worst consumers of the pickup artist community. If anything, that cycle is what it's very easy for media figures to just blow up and pretend is the whole thing, isn't it? Whereas, like you say, if someone comes to you, they're probably like a normal bloke who's maybe 25. Like you say, he's got his job going. He's, he maybe does a bit of sport. He has some friends. So he's got the rest of his life in order, but he needs to figure out this girlfriend thing. Like he's had a few, it never worked out properly. He wants a legit one. He maybe sees you're married. He asks someone. That's very different from the customer who watches a video where it's like, guys, you got to treat him like this and you can do whatever. And then you can actually date 3 of them anyway. Like the person who's even going to find that appealing is different, or at least they're at a different point on their journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's a couple of different points I want to pick out on.
Yeah, do it.
The first one is like the kind of lost guy who looks up to certain kind of people as a role model, and it's it's often like one of my friends online. He always calls it about like your e-daddy, It's like you have your
Okay.
e-daddy, right? Which is
Okay.
like your guy online who kind of, men historically have fathers, but they also have mentor figures, right?
Yes.
Separate from their fathers historically. So it's not like this is an unusual phenomenon. It's just because we're so atomized now, we tend to look at people online and they kind of fit that kind of, mentor role.
Yes.
And like the problem is there is this kind of seduction. I mean, we can get into kind of spiritual elements here in terms of there's this very seductive kind of glamorous, glitzy kind of experience, which is maybe not so good for you in the long term. And then there's the kind of less attractive on the, on the surface, but that's actually going to give you a much deeper life experience in terms of what I would say is like having a deep relationship. And the two things are aligned, and it's very easy to get lured into the glitz and the glamour.
Yes.
It's much easier to market to someone if you like, hey, here's me with 10 beautiful women, you can have this too, than like me with my wife and my kids and like, we're having a great time, but like it's, it just doesn't have that same visual impact on a certain kind of guy.
Sure.
I can understand that. And the problem is with some of these guys as well is they are very kind of attuned to, we do have a fatherhood crisis now. We do, there is, a lot of guys grow up without dads nowadays. It's an unfortunate reality, and women, of course, daughters.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And they can kind of adopt these guys as almost like a surrogate father figure who kind of provides this what they believe this mentorship and this way of living. But it doesn't come with that one-on-one tailored advice, and it also doesn't come with that actual interest in the person. A lot of these guys in the in the more sleazy end, as you mentioned, within every industry, there's going to be someone scamming. Is they don't care about the people they're talking to.
Yes,
that if you're working with if you've got a community with 10,000 people in it or something, that's aimed at getting guys laid, you don't have any kind of connection to the people in there. They're just a number at that point, really.
Yes.
And that means you're not going to have that investment in actually helping them become a better man, actually develop their own kind of father-like figure, that their own masculinity, realize that there are areas that they are weak in, and that, there's actually better ways of doing things.
Mate, I was just thinking when you were saying that, I'll even give people what I think is a red flag. Here's something to look for if you're someone who's just encountering this space or you've only dipped your toe in. A red flag that'll show you who's more legit and who isn't is this. If you notice, the people who, like you are talking about, I suspect similarly, don't really care about the consumer. They just care about getting some consumers and money and power and influence and all that. Yeah. They will use what are the most cynical and I would say dark psychological marketing techniques. Like, for example, it will be about the idea that if you don't take their course, you are a loser. You will never get laid. You will fail. You are an idiot. If you can't succeed on their course, you're a loser. All the real people they'll use all these things that prod. I mean, women should know this in their marketing themselves in the media. This is used all the time. They use the darker things where they push your insecurities. Whereas I would say, like, think about the way this conversation is going. Your pitch wouldn't be, look, if you don't do this, you're going to be a broke, dead loser without a fucking sports car. Your whole pitch would be like, no, here's why you should aspire to do it. Here's why it's going to make your life better. Here's why, don't worry that now that you haven't got those skills, we can give you those skills. You're not a loser. Everyone can learn some of these and become at least a decent level, right? I noticed there's a one's like a fear reaction. The other one's like you're trying to attract someone to something better, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one's aspirational. The other's, kind of, I don't know.
It's almost like running away from your fear or some shit, or like what the worst scenario,
Yeah, I mean, it's painting you like I once had I actually once had a client who told me he'd been on a call with somebody else in a similar situation. He was having problems in his marriage, and the other guy basically told him, "Look, if you don't take coaching with me, you're going to get divorced. Your kids are going to become drug addicts. They're going to be living out the streets. They haven't got a father figure." And believe it or not, he didn't work with him. He did work with me.
Sure.
Because it's like, no, it's like, okay, like I can't, guarantee what's going to happen because there's no guarantees in this, but I can help you guide out of it, give you some clarity, and, you can at least, push things forward. And, it went pretty well in the end.
Sure.
But it's now one thing you did say is like kind of running away from your fear. Like, now I will say that if you do feel uncomfortable or you do feel like fear about something, like I'm not necessarily against using that as an internal motivator.
Okay.
Right? That's probably telling you that there's something that you need to, if you feel fear about something, you feel, worried about something, that's your intrinsic, it's like your internal kind of call your attention to something you need to fix.
Yes, put it this way, I would say this, as someone who was in that position myself, mate, I was even in that position in my work. Like when I began my work, I've often told this story, I wasn't a really confident person. I wasn't great on camera. I didn't have camera presence. I couldn't wait and sort of recover from a stumble. If I fucked up my questions back in the day, mate, I used to just end an audio interview in 2 minutes and that was it. And I just thought, right, hope next time I can go a bit longer. Like I actually was someone who even in my job had this fear, etc. And what I can tell you is this is another sort of sign that people shouldn't be put off by, though, in this case. That isn't a red flag. Like the red flag there, if you feel fear, is this, right? You're going to perceive it. You're going to externalize it that it's the situation that's uncomfortable. It's the other people. Whereas actually, I would say it's, even though you're not going to want to hear this initially, it's you. It's your response is the fear response. That's the insecurity. So what I would say is, like, even though it's going to be uncomfortable, the analogy, because it's just one people will know in this space, it's like the idea of doing the cold showers. Yeah, it's going to suck at first, but the idea is if you get through it, first of all, what incredible feeling of satisfaction you're going to have. And then secondly, there are actual benefits to being able to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, of course.
Yeah, it's about facing your fears and overcoming it. And you know, be not letting your fears dictate your life. Like we all suffer fears. We all have areas of our life where, you know, we're not doing as well as we probably like almost certainly everyone has got some element of that to their life. It's about then not avoiding that problem, right? And taking the steps then to fix it. And you're absolutely right in terms of when you do feel fearful, when you do get nervous in, you know, your response, it's very easy to externalize these problems. But at the heart of it, it's you and how you're responding to your emotional state. It's whether you feel uncomfortable right now. So that causes me to say, actually, I'm going to retreat from this conversation.
Yes.
You know, a common thing I hear people say is, I don't have anything to say to women. I don't know what to say. And you say, well, when you're with your friends, do you have things to say? Yeah, of course. I've got loads to talk about. Well, it's not that you don't have anything to say then. It's the way that you're responding to the situation you're in, right? And it's the fact that you perhaps either you're feeling uncomfortable because of maybe there's some sexual tension, or it's just something you're not become used to yet, or there's this, often guys will kind of build up women in their minds that, you know, women are this, you know, scary creature from another planet, where they're just humans. They are different. Don't get me wrong. We are, you know, men and women are different, but they're just humans at the end of the day. And they have their own insecurities, by the way, their own fears and their own problems. And when you then withdraw from a conversation because you feel uncomfortable and like, oh, I don't have anything to say, you're actually implicitly rejecting her.
Yes.
And this is where a lot of the problems come. Guys think, oh, you know, the conversation kind of just fizzled out, or, you know, she wasn't that interested. Whereas she might have been really interested in, you know, talking to you. And then suddenly you got in your own head, you started overthinking things, you got nervous, and then you just expected her to then just continue as if nothing happened and continue this conversation as if it's just going to be a normal flowing conversation. And it's not, because what you're actually doing is you're subtly rejecting her. When you pull away like that, you're saying, actually, I'm not interested in taking this conversation deeper. Right?
By the way, one thing you're touching... Yeah, go on.
Yeah, go on.
Well, one thing you're touching on here that I thought I would spring you to now is another thing that I want to make clear, especially because if you notice, I'm sort of billing this for people who maybe have heard about the area, but they don't know much, or they have an interest, but they just haven't explored it. One thing I would say in this regard that you're nailing, but I'll put the framework on, because my way of seeing things, I try to build up a model of how the person's like doing it. Basically, what I would say is this to the person listening. What you have to think of is what the dynamic is between men and women when they're in a situation where a man is talking to a woman and the perception of the man is, I might be chatting you up, and the woman knows I'm being chatted up. As you're saying, in that scenario, the mistake is to put a model from a different scenario, or to not even know how to model it. So if you think, for example, well, I'm having a conversation with her, but, you know, she's not really sort of like going for that, you know, she's not really like giving me as much feedback as I want, or she only makes me do the conversation. Like, what you're mistaken there is you don't know what the expectations are for both sets of people. So what you don't understand in that scenario, for example, is that, like, here's another little clue for you guys. She'll just leave if you're really boring and it's a shit convo. She's not just going to stand there for half an hour. Like, the whole point of a high-quality woman who has a bunch of people who would be interested in her is she could dismiss you with a look, with a hand. She could turn away from you. She could even just say to you, they're allowed to be rude even. She could even just say, this is boring, and leave. Like, if she's still listening to you, still responding to you, looking in your eyes, smiling, etc., she's actually interested whether you think the convo is going great or not. Like, something's holding her attention. Like, nothing's lost. You know, just because you lost your place for a moment, You can't think of the next line. And just quickly, another thing I'd tag on is this whole thing that they also try to sell. You notice this goes more into the darker side of pickup, where you almost do your own messed up version of like, everyone's equal and we're all the same, is where you're like, see, I never pay for a woman's drink. And you know what? She pays for the drinks. She has to bring the conversation. I'm the prize. It's like, look, the prize thing, mate, was to get you out of your own head and make you realize, like you say, that she's not on a pedestal, some superhuman being. She's someone with her own insecurities who's also in a dynamic relationship in terms of like who likes who and how's it going. So I would say on that one is, I think that's even a whole dead end itself, mate. The idea that like you have to make them do it all. It's like that. The reason that appeals to young guys as well is because they aren't capable of holding a conversation. So if you just say, well, it ain't your fault, she's supposed to lead the convo. Yeah, look, in the short term, that'll make someone listen to you, but you'll be very unsuccessful with women, I think. And you'll be very unsatisfied. Like, I always say it like this to people who are friends of mine. I used to find it very intimidating to talk to women until I got decent enough at it that I realized, like you said, to stop focusing on myself and start looking at the other person in the convo. And what I quickly realized was this, mate. Man, if you actually embrace each of the roles that we all can have in these societies, I actually prefer the male one, mate. Obviously, I have my own biases because I've got the hardware for it. But I mean in the sense that, like, dude, once you have the basic skill set where you can approach the women and talk to them, I'd way rather be the one picking the women I want, going to them and trying to win them over to see if we have some rapport than being the woman having to stand and wait and hope the right guy comes up. Like, if you actually get past the initial difficulty, I think it's way better to be the man from my experience. You know, obviously, I don't know what the situation is like for the women, but if you notice, I've intentionally done it where instead of feeling like woe is me, I've spun it like I can have the advantage in a way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like the time when you catch eyes with a woman and then you decide not to go and talk to her, you feel crap, right? You feel like disappointed, like, I regret, I should have done that. So does she. She's like, yes, I wish he would have. Exactly. I wish he'd have talked to me. And this is one of the things that a lot of guys miss, that like women, if they're interested in you, you do it in the right way, right? You're not just acting super creepily. They like it when you hit on them. They like it. It's attractive. It also makes them feel
even if you're being cheeky, even if they're not going to go with you. Yeah. Women love flirting, of course.
As long as you make it fun, right? And don't get like set these expectations where it's like, okay, I've got to get an outcome from this. Yes. And if I don't get an outcome, okay, screw you. It's like, no, just enjoy it for what it is. You can have a 2-minute conversation with a girl that doesn't go anywhere, where you just flirt a bit and just catch eyes and have a little smile and then just leave. And you can both just benefit from it. Not every situation has to become like, I've got to, get her number. And
those are great practice, of course, right?
Exactly. Because, when you get to the point where someone is interested and there is that real deep mutual chemistry, then you're more comfortable with it. You've had that exposure to it. It's not something new. A big part of this, and this is why I also say like some element of pickup is not all bad, because it's about getting you out your comfort zone and building those habits. And like you say, like in your situation, it's a stepping stone.
Yes.
Right. The problem is like one of my friends once put it as like kind of the red pill and kind of pickup. It's like a life raft for guys. It's like you're stuck on a desert island and suddenly someone throws you this life raft. And of course you jump onto it. It's great. Sure. It's like there's this chance to get free of this and get some success and, not be stranded on this island. But then when you float past, the place where you come from and or like a beautiful city, there's people there, there's things going on. It's like a place you want to live. You think, well, it's, you have to swim for 20 meters. Maybe it's like, I'm actually safe on this life raft. Sure. I'm going to ignore this beautiful place that I could go and live my life and just carry on floating adrift. And it's like, it's almost an essential step for many men in certain situations, but it's key not to get lost in it. And there's good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it as well. Like you're much better off, in my opinion, going for like a more genuine, authentic based model that gets you connecting with women on a deep level, as opposed to following canned pickup lines. And she does X, you do Y, and like then she responds this, and you've got to pull away, and then you've got to neg her, and then all this crap going on where it's like you're playing a game at that point.
Yes,
right, and you might be able to manipulate some damaged woman into sleeping with you. You might be able to get lucky with someone who's maybe had a couple of drinks and she kind of she enjoys a little bit of the dance herself, and then you get some success, but ultimately, it's not going to lead you to a deep, fulfilling relationship, because the only way you're going to do that is by being true to yourself. Now, that doesn't mean just that just be yourself and it will work. Unfortunately, that's not how life works.
That doesn't work with anyone, by the way. Spoiler, like that. Like even if it's with your mom, if you tell her absolutely everything, she won't like it all either, mate. You know?
Oh yeah, exactly. We all have different masks to wear in different situations, right? Like we all have to be a congruent, aligned person. But you know, the way you're talking to me now is not the way you talk to your mom. It's not the way you talk to your girlfriend. You know, it's not the way you talk to your kids. Same. Like it's like we're still the same person, but we play slightly different roles.
Yes. There's actually nothing dishonest in case people are worried. Like I say, as you say, the best way to consider it is, I mean, there's that famous Japanese saying, isn't there, where there's like the mask of what you wear for society, then there's the ones for people you love, and then there's the one you have for yourself. It's the idea you just show different aspects of yourself. And crucially, like you're alluding to, it would actually be very unhealthy and probably imply something about your insecurities if you did want to dump everything about yourself on someone, especially someone you just met. You know, that's not you reveal yourself in layers. You know, you show different parts, and also you've got to feel that they're attuned, like they're ready to see the next part of me, or it's the right person to show this aspect to. And obviously, this is an aspect people have. A lot of people. I mean, I'll tell you myself, mate. I am autistic, so a natural impulse is to just think like, well, you know, if it's true, you just say it, isn't it? It's a fact. Which is like, by the way, that's probably the number one area online men run into problems is to just say things that are like are inappropriate in that setting, even if they are true, or they say things that again may be true but are uncomfortable or make people uncomfortable. Like you've got to know when, like, truth alone in this particular setting, bear in mind you're not just aiming for truth, you're not a philosopher, you're trying to have a relationship and a rapport with someone, so truth can't be the only factor. You've got to sort of, like we say, you've got to do it in stages, right?
Yeah, I once had a client refer to it as the vulnerability onion, and ever since he said that, it's kind of stuck with me. It's this idea of being vulnerable with people, because like vulnerability comes with all these negative contexts.
Yes,
right? It's a negative word that like men shouldn't be vulnerable. Like, it's total crap, because the way that you connect with someone is by being vulnerable with them. And my definition of vulnerability is sharing with people that you don't share. You know, sharing something you wouldn't share with everyone.
Yes.
So in one setting, you know, me talking about, you know, my work with you right now is an element of vulnerability. So I'm talking about exactly what I do in my work.
Sure.
But, you know, if I just met someone in the street, I wouldn't talk like this. You know, I wouldn't get into this level of depth. I'm sharing a little bit about one aspect of me in my life that then connects me with the person that I'm talking to. Now, in another situation, like as you get deeper with someone, you know, in a relationship setting, you should gradually over time peel back these layers of vulnerability, and then in turn they will feel more comfortable with you because you're trusting them with something about yourself you don't share with everyone, and they will in turn trust you more and be more comfortable sharing with you. And it becomes this reciprocal cycle where you both kind of open up over time.
And it's like you said, it's an investment, right? I'm investing something, you're investing something, we're going to grow something together, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, hopefully you should get to the point, like in a really deep, meaningful relationship, where you can feel comfortable sharing pretty much everything.
Yes.
Like, and that takes years to get to. You know, you can't just go in and run in and do that.
Actually, I have a question about that then, because another area I wanted in this discussion, obviously we're men, so we're obviously speculating and trying to use observation and theory of mind as to what the women are thinking. But spoiler, like in every area of life, if you look at people's actions, you will often get quite a reliable guide of what they could be thinking about, whether or not they say they are thinking about that or not. And one thing I would say on this topic, because I think it's a topic that's a really important one, but it's so fraught. So people might know there's a very famous book on this topic called Models by Mark Manson, which is about this perspective that you use vulnerability as a way to build the rapport and the relationship with the woman. Now, the problem with that is it might sound like what in media you're hearing all the time from women, which is, you know, don't be afraid to cry, guys, and, you know, tell people that you're scared. Now, I always say this, like everything in media, that's not only sensationalized and extreme, but it's even given to you in a way that I think is actually slightly harmful. Like, as we were saying about the conversation earlier, where you wouldn't just show all of yourself to everyone all the time. I mean, by the way, it's part of the word vulnerability. You'd also be open to be very damaged and wrecked. Yeah, a million ways over, and lose all your social status, look like a fool, seem weird, a million negative aspects. What I would say is this. I do think in media, they try to make you feel like you're supposed to just do it for everyone openly. So what they want is they want the hardened dad who would normally sit down and, you know, keep it all like you stiff upper British lip and all that. They want him to just go on Twitter and be like, I'm actually very insecure and I cry every night and, you know, I think I'm a bit worthless. But the problem with that is, right, that just devalues him totally as a man and in society as a figure, no matter what they say. So what the problem here is this, guys, you have to think of this just in the same way as men might think they want something. So the analogy earlier of either they think they want unlimited one night stands, or maybe I'll give you a great one. When you were talking about the men where they have the problem talking to the woman, their naive dream, if you gave them a genie, would be, right, I want the hottest woman in the world to approach me, do all the work, signal very clearly that she's into me, and then we sleep together and maybe have a relationship. And it's like, you'll never get that though, bro. Anyone who would come up to you like that, even if she was hot, she's going to have something wrong with her, mate. If she's just walking up to a random guy who says nothing to her, starts a convo, keeps it going, at that point, you'd actually, there's going to be like a nasty surprise somewhere in that equation. So I'd say the same thing on the female side. They might think they want that because maybe they've never had that. Maybe they imagine that the really attractive man who has the mystique and all this mystery, and he doesn't willingly just give up all his stuff. Maybe they think they want him to come and be the guy who, I'm actually going to use this word in the way it was intended, not the simpering, like he's sort of whiny and he has they might think they want that, but they wouldn't. I think it would be a massive turn off for them. I think they would actually crack their whole perception and idealized dream of who that man was, which is part of what you're enjoying when you're first in the relationship, almost like the self-hypnosis element of like, they're great and I'm great and it's working together great, it's all going awesome. So you get through the early parts. Like, I actually think like not only has media really made that seem very extreme, but I also think not only will it not work for men, I don't think it works for women either, mate. I think as you say, you nailed it at the end there. Even if it's your wife, you don't on day one tell her everything and all the secrets. You gradually, it's like a movie. You don't tell me all the fucking end at the beginning. I've got to go through the experience of the movie so I understand why the characters feel that way, why they did the things that way, and then I can come hopefully to a conclusion at the end that draws it all together. So what do you think on that? Because I feel like when you say vulnerability, people have like a very simplistic perception of what that should mean.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing with vulnerability is that obviously it opens up for you to be hurt. And a lot of the reasons guys don't want to be vulnerable is because they once did it in the wrong context. Yes. And they got hurt. And it's same as a kid. You put your hand in the fire, you learn not to put your hand in the fire. And, emotional pain it lights up the same pain receptors in your brain as physical pain. So when you suffer that emotional pain through doing this, you don't then want to do the same thing. So that causes a lot of guys not to want to do it. But the key to vulnerability for men is that it has to be it's showing your depth as a man, right? The key is you first off have to have that masculine edge, right? Yes. You have to have that kind of character to you, that confidence, that swagger that means you're going to go up and talk to her in the first place, right? But then you want to make sure that you're showing that you have this depth to you. That's not just, I'm just a caricature of a man who's like, I just, shoot guns and drive yes, my pickup truck sure. And then like, drink beer with my boys on a Friday night. Like, it's like, you can do all that, but then you want to show that you've also got this depth to you. That's like, that's not all I am. I'm a whole human. I'm not just some media stereotype.
Yes.
Right. Which is not the vibe you want to go for. So it has to be coupled with the two. It's like you have to make her feel sexy and you have to make her feel secure, which is that you have to have this kind of sexiness, like this sexual chemistry between you both, this masculine edge where you work out, you've got a good job, you've got this vision for your life, you're very kind of, analytical, you got things going for you. The way that you communicate is you've got, you've got an element of disagreeableness to you where,
yes,
you can't just get what you want with them and just be all soft. But you're not just that, right? And it's about blending these two things in, which is the difficulty, because I think in general today, a lot of guys do struggle with the latter part we're talking about, the more masculine.
Absolutely.
Edge. I think that's why so many people do so many men align with the pickup artist, the kind of red pill, the kind of more, masculine stuff. And that stuff's important, but it has to be a healthy kind of masculinity. It has to be a masculinity like what I would consider more kind of like paternal masculinity, where you're trying to turn into that kind of wise father figure where you're strong enough to protect your family from the bandits that are attacking you, or the pack of wolves historically, that, you're the one who's there and you're able to face down the danger. But then when the danger's gone, you can be in the family setting and you've got this softness to us. You can take care of the kids.
Yes.
You can help comfort your son when he's upset and make him feel better. Your wife, when she's worried about something that's going on, you can help, shoulder her emotional load to make her feel better. And it's about having these two, women want these two kind of almost seemingly contradictory requisites within men. Like often yes, guys will refer to this as like alpha and beta, right? It's like alpha traits and then there's beta traits. In reality, it's not, that's a false dichotomy, right? It's like we need to have both of them and be able to blend both, again, depending on context.
I mean, it's the same with women, right? I mean, we all want the woman who, when we initially meet, is beautiful and sexy and she's going to be sensual with us, but we also don't want only that. That's why the one night stand doesn't work. Eventually, she has to transition and become just herself and a woman, and we experience the other aspects of a woman in a relationship, right? Men want both too, and we're also, I can imagine for women, it's a tightrope too, right? They're trying to, if I flex too much into the sexy angle, I'm put in that box. If I'm not sexy enough, I seem like I only care about the relationship. Maybe he thinks he's not going to get women are having the same dynamic too, guys. It's just they've got a different set of problems to deal with because they're dealing with our problems, obviously.
Yeah, believe me, like I would not want to be like a single woman in today's environment. Like I actually think women have it way worse, actually, in a lot of regards.
Oh, it's really difficult. Yeah, of course.
Really tough, man. Like it just historically as well. Like, I think just generally, like if you look at kind of like the bell curve of like distribution between men and women, there are generally like less very successful men, and there's a lot of like quite like good women, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And it's kind of the way that it is, but for whatever reason, it's kind of skewed in one direction.
It's just that if people know, it's a famous concept that goes, it seems, across most areas. It's that basically there are loads of women who'd be considered like average to good. Like that'd be like the massive portion there. Whereas with men, it's like there are massive extremes and then loads of people in the middle as well.
Yeah. So like the classic one they give is like most men, men take the highest paid jobs in society, but they also make up most of the prison population. Right? Yes,
and the homeless and all that jazz. Yes, exactly. They're both extremes.
Like, they're two extremes. So like men tend to be more kind of like extremely distributed.
Yes. By the way, one thing I thought I wanted to ask you about, because this is, if you notice, one of my styles of interviewing, by the way, mate, is I like to listen to other interviews and shows and then go, why don't they ever ask about this? Or why don't they ever follow up on that point? Like, I don't like to just circle the same, like 5 topics everyone does. So one thing I want to ask you about, and this is something I've been thinking about recently, so I want to get your take on it. One of the areas I feel like that the negotiation of this vulnerability between the man and the woman in the relationship has come to a weird stage. Because again, coming from my own background, if you're someone who's autistic or in any way like that, and I think on some level all men have some aspect of that, that's why it's a spectrum, I think one of the problems men have is they really do sometimes make the mistake of taking people at face value and just what they say. And if they say, I think this, then they think, oh, it's what they want, then I'm just giving them what they want. And they don't ever think of things like, well, you yourself have things you think you want, but don't know yet, or maybe when you got them, you wouldn't like them. So one thing I would say is I feel like the silly negotiation that we've now made because of this media response that men should all be vulnerable is that there are going to be a bunch of men just go, oh, okay, and then unload everything, and it's going to absolutely wreck them. They are going to get hurt, and it's going to ruin the whole relationship. They're going to have they're not going to be respected. They might get comfort. They might get a hug. They might get someone telling them short term, this is right. This is what I wanted, but it's not going to yield the results. Like, you can just, again, look at the actual outputs. Look at people who've done this. Does it work? It doesn't. And if it did, by the way, spoiler, people would have figured it out. Like, there's a reason why the women don't just go to the man who's immediately open. Like you say, they still pick what would be called the high quality male with the mystery, and their dream, it's why Jordan Peterson always says, like, the ultimate female vision of a relationship is Beauty and the Beast. It's the idea that they get the mysterious guy that has all those harsher aspects they want, but then he reveals this side to himself that he secretly was someone who could show some vulnerability, who could connect with them emotionally, did care about them on some aspect, and in a way that makes them special, right? So in this scenario, what I would say is, let me think where I was going with this. Fuck, where was I before I gave the Beauty and the Beast analogy? Wait there a second.
It's like the media portrayal of vulnerability and just...
Oh, yes, thank you. Basically, I think what happens is, aside from the men who just misread that and take it at face value, I think women, again, are allowing themselves to be tricked, because what's going to happen is the smart, socially attuned man is going to hear, right, they want vulnerability. And because, as we said, it wouldn't actually be very effective to do pure, open, 100% open vulnerability, they're going to give you a sort of version of vulnerability, as in they're going to learn, right, I can open up this little bit, or in this scenario I say a little bit more. But even then, it's going to be a negotiation if they're smart, right? They're not really just going to open widespread. Like, on some level, women are almost asking to get, they're sort of hinting where you can trick them in a way by asking for the vulnerability like that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. And like, it's, there's always going to be an element of that. There's always kind of like, the male feminist argument is like, a male feminist is just someone who's basically trying to manipulate his way into a woman's pants. Generally, it's like that's really, even if they're not doing it like
it's not always conscious, but there's always some of that if you look where they end up.
Yeah, because it's about creating yourself in a position where you are, perceived to be higher value, or perceiving.
The joke is no one ever uses this terminology, mate. But the male feminist is just the male pick me. He's just the one saying to the girls, "Hey, girls, I'm not like all those stinky men. I'm just, I'm the one that you'd like." The joke is that's the male pick me.
Yeah, it's actually a symptom of a wider kind of like problem of certain guys they look to ingratiate themselves with women via seeking women's approval, whereas women don't actually what they think women want.
Yes.
Rather than actually just being true to themselves and actually being a man. There's a reason why like men act a certain way. It's not all like everything humans do is like this like interplay between biology and culture. And like you can even argue that like culture comes out of human biology because we're social creatures, and
sure.
It's a complicated issue, right? But everything we do is kind of mediated between these two factors. There are biological determinants behind our behaviors, but the way they actually manifest depends on the culture that we're in. And it's the culture that kind of like dictates exactly how these things manifest, which is why you have, universality. Like I mentioned with marriage, every culture has marriage, but the way that actually marriage works might be different, right? It's like there's this biological determinant that then gets kind of molded by the culture that it's in, and the way that it manifests differs. I've also forgot where I was going with that as well.
You were talking about like the way, where were we just before that? Let me think. Because it was about the idea of vulnerability.
Stuff, right?
Male feminists.
Yeah, so it's like there's this intrinsic desire for all men to have, success with women, right? It's an intrinsic desire, whether it's to get into a relationship, whether it's to just have sex, right? To procreate in a kind of very rudimentary sense. And the way that it interplays within our own society is that sometimes guys think, okay, I have this biological desire to have a relationship or to have women. Culture then tells me that the way to do this is through, being vulnerable or being a certain way with women. So therefore, I'm going to do that to try and get this need met.
Yes.
Which is that core, desire for intimacy. It doesn't even have to be sexual, right? It can be, emotional intimacy. It can be the depth that comes with that, support, love, everything else. They're also intrinsic desires.
Sure.
But instead of actually going about it in a real way where it's like, I'm interested in you, and like you don't have to say this, right? Obviously you don't have to spell it out, but you show through your actions the fact that I go and talk to you. That is me saying to you, hi, I'm interested in you. And like I don't ever have to say that to her because that would be weird, right? It's
implicit in what you're doing, right?
It's implicit within the sub-communication of the conversation.
Which is a key topic right here. This is another thing, especially if you're a nerd guy, the biggest stumbling block for you is going to be trying to just listen to the words they say and interpret it like a chord. No, what you actually have to do is ask yourself, like, what would a person be feeling who said that line? Or what might they want as a response if they say, to me, all female communication is like subverbal. It's all about vibe and feel. If you even listen to them, they're telling you this the whole time. It's why you can have an argument on the internet where a man goes, logically, I said this and it was right, but then she just disagreed and said she felt like it wasn't the case, but that's not what's true. It's like, bro, you're talking past each other. She's actually trying to communicate with you, but in her way, what she's telling you is like, essentially, I haven't even disputed with it, Sean. I'm just saying I don't feel good about that. And that's like, I've moved it to a different domain of, should things be this way? Or, like, to me, that you can pick this up if you've got something for this. But I thought it would be a good aspect to broach to people, because I had this problem myself my whole life as well, mate. But once I keyed into this, part of it was through my work with interviews where I found the same thing. Instead of just listening to the words, I'm trying to listen to what they're sometimes not saying, what they're implying. Yeah. Why would they say that? That's a way more useful guide than just like, look at the specific words. Like, what could they mean by this exact thing? Like, I think you get lost in the weeds with that. Yeah, absolutely. Everything we say has there's like an undercurrent behind it, right? Which is also why, word choice is so important. It's why policing language is such a different, such a key thing within, certain areas that people do want to police language, because the choice of words you use. It's why using, like, for example, a political slogan is really dangerous, because you might think, well, I just mean what it literally means. But the whole point is that has all these other associations connected that automatically come with it, that everyone else saying that term means. And so you might not know it, but you are absolutely aligning yourself with those associations and signaling to other people that you want to be aligned with them, whether you get that aspect of communication or not. Yeah,
And you've always got to be conscious of these sub-communicated vibes, like the oversharing thing that we've talked about so often. Oversharing is you're signaling that I'm lonely. I don't have anyone to share this with, so I'm sharing it with you. I'm a stranger. That's what's happening in this situation. That's why women are so turned off by that, because what you're actually saying is, I don't have deep, meaningful relationships with anyone, so I'm just going to share it with you, a total stranger, which is completely misaligned.
You'll get this analogy. Everyone who's from the UK and isn't super rich will know the feeling when you get on a bus and you don't want to talk to anyone, you want to just go home, and someone gets on the bus, and in Britain, we all don't sit on the same seats. We all sit apart because we're all slightly weird and British. If someone comes and just sits right next to you that you don't know at all and started talking and sharing about their life, you probably feel a bit uncomfortable. You'd be like, this is a bit weird. Why are they doing that? You know, like, they might not have said anything wrong even, dude. They might just be sharing a nice story about what happened to them the other day, but you're going to get a weird vibe of like, what the hell is this? Like, this is too much.
Yeah, and that's another thing of British like culture. And I do think like Northern European culture, again, to go back to the biological aspect of it, I do think Northern Europeans generally struggle with this more.
Absolutely.
Than like Latin cultures or anything like that. And I don't think it's all cultural. Because you can go to America and like a lot of my clients are like German, Dutch, Anglo kind of background. And they still struggle with this. It's just literally a biological phenomenon. Scandinavians as well, classic people who struggle.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. And it all comes down to, and that's also why these cultures tend to have a bigger drinking culture.
Absolutely.
Because that's the one time you're able, like if you sit down in a British pub and you have a couple of pints and someone does exactly the same conversation, you're open to it.
They have permission to do it,
They have permission to do it. Yes. It's the only way that within British culture, we can kind of almost be more open with our...
You know, you might like this. I once heard a story from, it was actually a Terrence McKenna talk, if people know that guy, where it was a story of some like explorer that had gone to some like, I'm going to say like Amazonian or African tribe, like some like sort of tribe that hadn't really had like much exposure with the west of the Anglosphere at the time. This is obviously like, 19th century or something. And they went there and what they were searching for actually was like psychoactive components, like, mushrooms or whatever. And what they found though when they went there was that these people had this festival where they would take a type of like a mushroom or something, and then they would all go crazy and they would dance in this crazy way, and it was almost like, if people know the old concepts like the Bacchanalia in Greece, where they would get drunk and they would go to these reveries and the violence and everything. And what was funny was when they took the actual mushroom away and tested it, Jack, they found it had no psychoactive components in it. And when they asked one of the people in the village, then like, this doesn't actually do anything, the person who knew a little bit about the West, so he could sort of interface with the concepts, sort of just explained like, yeah, but it gives you permission to do all those things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the problems there with emotional repression is a big key to this, because when it comes to communication with people, every time we're communicating, we are not just communicating through the literal content of our words.
Yes.
Like the people listening to me right now, they can hear me when I'm saying like the literal content of my words. I'm communicating with emotion, that there's this more depth behind the words that I'm speaking, right? There's something, it's not just the literal words that I'm saying. There's this emotional vibe, this emotional undercurrent that's going with it. And you will notice anybody who is charismatic, any political leader, any leader of a movement, successful businessman, they kind of instinctively know this, and they're able to tap into these emotional undercurrents.
Yes.
Now, there's still a slight difference between like doing this, with men and with women, but we're always doing it, right? And people that can kind of almost consciously do this, because like it's a skill like anything else. Right, like being able to communicate. You mentioned before, like this was something you really struggled with when you were younger, doing interviews. You just shut it off after 2 minutes. Now, you get this, like whether it's conscious or not, you're able to communicate, add that emphasis, add that passion, add that excitement. If they're telling you, something that's serious, you got to show that that you're taking this seriously, not dismiss it.
Oh, by the way, mate, even as I'm talking to you now, if someone's listening, I've sometimes had this question from fans. They ask like, why? Because I didn't used to do this at the beginning. They asked like, why do you sometimes just say like, yeah, or like, oh, totally. Like, because I'm doing it at key points in the conversation where I'm just making sure based on like how you're talking, like that, you haven't lost me or you haven't gone too far, or like, yeah, I'm right there with you, keep going. Like, that's what I'm sort of sub-communicating,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do it too. You're showing that you're engaging with them in a very small way. Right. Like, and there's other ways that you can do this. Like, there is a case that you don't want to make this almost like too like, you don't want to make it seem like you're listening when you're not.
You can spam it a bit, yeah, for sure.
You can spam it a bit, and you can also just be like, lose the actual thread of what you're doing. Is like, oh, I'm supposed to show that I'm listening, so I'm going to show that I'm listening. And what you're actually doing is you're thinking about listening rather than listening, right? So there are ways that you can kind of get out of these things. And there's, it's generally when guys have these problems, it is kind of like an unconscious pattern.
One thing you're referencing there that also makes me think of, which I'm sure you've had experience with, which is that's also half the problem people have when they're initially talking to women, is they're still stuck in their head on what they're saying and what the response is. Whereas, like I say, the example would be like with my interviews. When I'd done a million interviews, mate, and I've just been in what I call the pocket of when it feels slightly uncomfortable, because you're in the moment where the reason it's uncomfortable is it could be brilliant. You could ask anything, but you could also ask the wrong thing. It could be terrible. So it's the uncertainty. It's the notion of electricity in the air. It could go badly, it could go well. When you learn to embrace that and sort of stay in that pocket, as it were, you actually find that, like, you don't worry as much about what you're saying anymore, because you learned this, like, I'm communicating the vibe and that. And then you can now focus on what they're talking about. And you know this. The second you actually listen to what they're saying and learn that what they're subcommunicating, they become like an open book, and you can have awesome conversations. Because, as you say, you'll never run out of something to talk about as long as they're vibing with you, as long as they're giving the right signals back. It's not about the words; it's about the feeling. So in that scenario, actually, they become they'll just tell you the things that infer what you can say next, or what would logically carry the conversation on. Right? It's actually not as mysterious as it all seems.
No, not at all. That's exactly what I teach, because it's like you will never run out of things to say. As long as you're present in the conversation, there will always be some kind of angle that you can take. And there's a logical next jumping off point, even when you get to like the end of a conversation, right? Like, because that does happen, that you get to natural lulls in the conversation. You kind of exhausted a topic, and then you have that little kind of pregnant pause, right? That happens there before someone decides to move on from the topic. Move the conversation in a different direction. That's like that pause right there, and a lot of doing well with women is not what you say, it's what you do in these moments.
Yes.
Right. Because
how you handle them, right?
It's how you handle them, because that's where that tension builds. You mentioned that kind of electricity that's kind of feeling that. And what guys have got to remember as well is that everyone feels this.
Yes.
Even the most confident seeming guy gets nervous, or has moments of anxiety, or has like a little kind of like feeling like, oh, well, did I say the wrong thing there? The difference is they don't let that stop.
Yes, exactly.
That's the real key. It's like realizing that, and then just realizing that all that's happening right there is you just feel you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but then it's your reaction to that feeling. The way that you react to that feeling dictates how other people perceive it.
Yes.
Because when you are then feeling uncomfortable, and maybe like us, we both ran out of things that we were like, oh shit, what was I saying a minute ago? But instead of just like freezing up and letting the conversation like die and getting all awkward, it's like, just, okay, run it back to me. Or, you jump over that moment of what could be.
Or you can even do literally what we just did. You could literally sort of say, because remember, the reason why in that scenario you and I are comfortable to say to the other person, well, actually was on that, is because when we're both knowing that the convo is going well. So it's like the other person is your partner in the convo. Like, I often would say this about my work when I would do my interviews in esports, mate. I would say, when I used to start the interviews, I thought either I'm trying to like get an answer out of them, or eventually what I learned was we're both like dance partners trying to create an experience for the viewer in that case. Well, in this case, when you're doing it with the one, it's an experience between the two of you. Like, what you're basically saying is like, look, I lost track for a moment there, but we're having a good convo. So like, let's pick it back up again. She might say something interesting, or you can make a joke out of it. It's so easy. The one thing I'd also say, because I'll use the example of the interviews, mate, was what I learned to do was, it wasn't like as I got better, I never had those moments I paused. It's just I learned that like I'm overinflating how important they are. They're actually very minor, and you can make it seem funny. Like, you can even say like, nah, I've lost my bloody point. Smoked too much weed last night. You could say some silly joke and you passed it already. And the second, this is the key point to understand if you're out there, guys, the second you get back to the convo, like you start a new thread, everyone's forgotten what happened 3 seconds earlier. You're back in the convo,
Like on that point, like when I first started doing, podcasts and interviews like this, I remember literally thinking in one's past, like, man, I left such a big pause in between like my words, right? Like, I was like, man, Did I seem like I didn't know what I was saying? Did I look like an idiot? Like kind of like I really have to think about my words. I can barely speak, I'm some kind of like Neanderthal. And then you listen back to it. And
I bet you couldn't even hear anything.
You can't even notice it.
Yeah. You don't hear anything, do you? It's like you were talking like 5% slower, but no one would ever pick up on that. Exactly.
And it feels like you completely lost the track of the conversation. And, and a part of it is, kind of getting used to it, getting comfortable with it, being exposed to it, and realizing that when you have these kind of like negative outcomes or these negative, you do the wrong thing, you don't actually have a negative outcome. And that's how you lessen the fear. I mentioned before, like fear, you shouldn't let fear stop you from doing something. That's the other side of everything you want in life lies on the other side of fear.
Yes.
Really, it's such a truth. If you feel fearful about something or worried about something, it's a call to face that. It's a call to push through it. And like, that doesn't mean like, if there's an area of your life, just use the example of women, because that's what we're talking about. This is an area you do feel, worried about. It's not going so well. You're fearful about it. Yeah, maybe you won't become like Casanova, right? But you don't have to be. You just have to shore it up enough and have a base enough understanding that means that you're capable of doing it, because we do all have intrinsic traits. Some people are naturally good at it.
Yes.
Some people just are naturally good with women. They just, it just comes naturally to them. They never have a problem with it for whatever reason. But that doesn't mean that because you're, naturally not as good as it, that you can't be successful.
Oh, mate, this is an area I can give a good sort of like framing of my own perspective, because just like I said in my work, like, a little bit about my esports work, right? In my actual work, because I was someone who wasn't like confident, was insecure about speaking, didn't have good on-camera presence, the joke now is, and this does actually happen to me, people just assume the opposite about me because I became really successful at it. They actually think I must be a loudmouth extrovert who was always, like life of the party, center of attention, like I'm an ego man. And because the joke is, basically people accept you as you appear. So once you master these things, you can become, like you say, you don't even have to be the best. Like obviously in theory, the absolute best person at social communication will be someone with a natural skill set who then worked with all these techniques and maxed them out, right? In the same way as like the best basketball players can be really talented and work really hard. But just like the old sports analogy goes, if hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So if someone's just a natural, which means they're going to get women and talk to them, then actually a lot of them are just going to rest on their laurels. And if you're the guy who starts not only not as a natural, but as a very unnatural figure, but you put in mad effort and you really dedicate yourself, here's the thing, you might not be the absolute best, but you can beat the natural. You really can, guys. And eventually people will just think you were a natural. That's when you've actually succeeded, for my money,
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's I also have a similar analogy in my life that at school, I was one of those kids who never had to try hard to do well. I always just got good grades no matter what. People used to get really angry at me because they'd be revising all night. I would do no revision, turn up to the exam and get a better score than them. And it's like, the problem with that though, is because I was naturally good at, school academia, is that I became really, really lazy. And I never developed that work ethic that actually, that could propel me and could have, took me to be a more successful person. And it actually took me kind of getting to a point when I was about 21, 22. And it kind of I skated by for about 3 or 4 years after school, no problem, doing, all right, went to uni and everything, did fine. But then after about 3 or 4 years, it was like those bad habits that I developed were really, really going to cap my potential. Where it's like I would have been, in a pretty bad place, I think, if I hadn't, basically got into self-improvement, got into, working on my weaknesses and developing. For me, that was literally developing a work ethic.
Yes,
I had to develop a work ethic, and it's something that I really had to work hard at. And now, I'm in my late 20s. I'm 29. I've got a wife. I've got 2 kids. I run my own business. I have content creation that I'm doing every week. I have time for a conversation like this. And that was not something that I could do naturally. Right. And yeah, sure, I'm not probably the hardest working man in the world, not by a long stretch, because I still have these periods where I just, I still have that kind of those old hangovers of my character, my old habits, right? But I'm at a point where I've become very successful just by working on that one particular weakness. And, there's obviously other stuff that go into those, skill sets. But it's not just that. But that was one area that I identified in my life was weak and that I needed to fix.
Right.
And this is what so many people, a lot of guys, they get into this view of like, I am where I am and I can't change it. Like you could always change where you are.
Absolutely. Yes.
And you do not have to, like, you have to realize that there are things outside of your control. Yes, but you can always control the way that you respond to things. You can always plot a different path. And, you mentioned that like nowadays, people think that you're an extrovert, even though they couldn't be further from the truth historically. A big part of that as well is that I think a lot of men in particular, like the only reason that can happen is if you leave where you came from. And I think a lot of guys, a lot of guys think, okay, they stay at home and this is how I am going to be. And people around you will have that vision of who you are.
They'll reinforce it, right?
Yeah, yes. They'll reinforce it. It's the, no Messiah can be a prophet in his hometown, right? It's like, yes. Jesus had to leave Bethlehem.
Dude, people don't get that analogy, because the part that people don't get is, imagine actually literally the case of Jesus. If someone knew Jesus when he was 13 and he came to them when he's 30 and said, look, I'm actually the Son of God and here's the truth, they go, no, you're not. You're Jesus who used to live down the road. That's the part people don't get about that analogy, dude. Is like, they think it's about the idea, they rejected the truth. It's like you say, if you come from a certain background, everyone's going to themselves, as part of how they view the boundaries between themselves and other people, reinforce all the things they think about you. It's going to be like a societal pressure naturally.
Yeah, you're that guy, and it's very hard to escape that reality, which is one of the reasons why, again, it's also said in the Bible, a man has to leave his home, he has to leave his family, and you have to go through this hero's journey where you actually reinvent yourself. Like it's actually an essential part of all male development, in my opinion, where and that doesn't mean you have to leave home forever.
No, this can be metaphorical
you have to leave
as well.
a country.
True.
Right? Yeah. Like, I'm not telling you, all right, you need to get, you have to go live in a foreign country or something like that. But it's like, you have to get out of that pattern for a while to give yourself the chance to reforge yourself often as well. And it's, historically we had rites of passage for this, and, there would be, that, men would literally go out and, do certain challenges. And then that would be like, okay, you've broken free from your childhood vision of who you were, right? It's like you proved yourself that you're not this person. You can become this new man. We don't have that anymore. But one way that you can, I mean, I always say the only rite of passage we have in Britain is, drinking your first 6-pack of lager and vomiting in a park.
Yes.
That's pretty much the British equivalent. It's like, we don't have that male kind of, older men, that mentee.
Like initiation to becoming a man.
Yeah, initiation, exactly. And
yes.
If you are someone who's struggling in these areas, that's something that you might need to do. You need to kind of break those environmental chains to your old self and give yourself a chance to forge something new. And I would only recommend that if you are really, starting.
Yeah. But there's a good
step.
pivot point here, though, mate, which is something I had wanted to ask you about, is why we're in this problem that we're in at the moment. Because, as you say, it's actually very dysfunctional sign that, men just naturally can't talk to women, which, by the way, spoiler, there's no fucking species if that doesn't happen. That literally is the foundation of whether we're all going to be here in 1,000 or 10,000 years. So, that obviously, we wouldn't be here right now if it hadn't have worked for the majority of human history and men were able to have these relationships with women, have children, father them, continue on, survive, etc. So what I would say is this: if I try to track where it's gotten lost, part of it is that as the last few generations have gone by, I think not only have they sort of lost, I mean, quite frankly, just in society, the notion of mentorship in general, like you're saying, in society, actually, you can even tell by how people frame it. They just frame it as, I didn't have my dad. But I agree with you. It's your dad alone doesn't do it anyway, even if you have a dad. That's why famously having an uncle is useful. Maybe he shows you some of the things your dad wouldn't show you because your dad's your dad. Maybe you have an older friend a few years ahead of you who can sort of give you some of the life lessons of, here's where I went wrong with this, or try doing this instead. Everyone has that aspect, but that has definitely been lost a lot in society, the notion of the mentor, the mentee. And so to me, part of the reason why those generations have lost it is the changing world. And a lot of that is things like media, movies, social engineering. Like, I don't blame the guy who grows up watching TV for making these mistakes we've referred to in this interview of going to women and telling them everything, or saying like, oh, whatever, honey. Yeah, you just have all the power. Ha ha. Yeah, girls really do run the world. Like, the person who does that thinks they think they're following a script that will be successful because the movie tells you will be successful. If you are Peter Parker, you will be successful at the end. If you're fucking some character from Friends, acquiescing to the women and saying some silly self-deprecating joke is what will win them over. The problem is that is like inverted from reality. What would you say to that? Yeah. Like, I think actually all that stuff will fuck you up if you do it.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And it even goes back further. It even goes back from like a switch from an agrarian culture to kind of like city-based culture, where it's like you historically would be, taken out into a male-dominated work environment, and even you can even go back further with things like Britain, shutting the coal mines down, things like that, where you had these male-dominated workspaces where you would get out from, the longhouse or out from the women, where you get this chance to be in a male-dominated environment where the men just say, "Oh, this is how it really is," and you don't really have those male or female only environments so much anymore. Everything has become kind of like blended, inclusive. Everything has to be inclusive, and
it's all one big beige homogenous blob, isn't it? Because as you say, the real joke of this is, it might seem, because the excuse and the charade of how they did this was they said they were doing it to empower women, but as you alluded to, dude, it hurts women as well. Like, they're actually not getting the men they want as a result, because there isn't a curated space where, as you say, you can experience sort of like a different side of yourself, as it were. You're always aware there's the presence of all types of people. It's the idea of like, if everyone has to be catered to. I often say this about speech. If nobody can be offended in the entire world, then by definition, we can have almost no conversation. Because almost everyone will be offended by something. Everyone gets it. So, like, I'm with you, mate. There's definitely an aspect where it's not as simple as just saying women did this. Because this is another thing I'm trying to emphasize when I have these conversations. I'm not about division. I'm not about men versus women and we look at all these silly women. I'm actually about trying to tell other men, you know what, if you listen to women, but you just don't listen only to what they're saying, they're trying to actually tell you and they're trying to connect too. It's just they're doing it in a different way, and we can all get blocked if we only model each other as men and as women, like as in, you model the women as if they were men and think how silly they are that they don't have these aspects that men do, but you ignore all the things that make them women. So to me, this is a massive detail, right? There's a reason why male-only spaces existed and female-only spaces, like famously, obviously, they'd bake bread together and knit and these things. That isn't just like domestic servitude. By the way, domestic servitude was just taking care of your family. What a wonderful thing to do. But it's also, like, as you say, it's a chance to learn from your aunt, from another girl who's just got married and had a child, from your mother. It's like it's a way where you can learn in a way where it's sort of safe to say certain things there because there's only one type of a person. There's not everyone,
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who's ever been, at the pub with their friends and then one friend brings their girlfriend, will know what we're talking about.
Yes.
Right? You're like, it's just a different vibe. It's not like necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's great to go out as couples. Sometimes you just want to be with the boys, and that you can talk about things in a bit of a more loose way.
Yes.
I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast right now can relate to what I just said right there. It just brings in a different feeling to it. But I want to pick on that point as well, like what you mentioned about kind of like, even though like keeping things kind of like exclusive or kind of divided a little bit here with like in certain areas with the sexes, so you have these spaces that are separate. That's not about like pitting us against each other. It's like you need that time away to make it work. And like, we don't want to create this dynamic where it's like if you're always around each other, you're gonna get frustrated. That's just naturally how it is.
Absolutely.
Like if you've been in a long-term relationship, you're married, anything like that, you need time away from your wife. Like you need time with men to kind of refresh yourself, and it brings you back and makes you feel better.
Yes.
Like when you're in the home, like I
mean, you lose a part of yourself when you're only in the relationship, right?
Absolutely.
You blend into whatever the sort of the symbiote is, or whatever you call it. What would you say? Amalgam. Like if you sort of become like you both merge into one thing in a way.
Yeah. And like, so there's like, in some ways, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think you should go through that process
Sure.
bit within a relationship. You should both mold to each other, like, but you still have to stay as an individual. It's like the idea is that, like, the way that I frame it is that, like, when you're in a relationship, it's not about, you know, you always say, you know, happy wife, happy life, this kind of phrase. It's not about doing what's good for your wife. It's about doing what's good for the relationship.
Yes.
And sometimes that means you doing what's right for you, not for her. Because sometimes you need that to look after yourself, so you feel in a good enough position to therefore actually be able to take care of her and actually feel the right thing. When you're always giving, as men are told to today, you have to acquiesce. You end up getting resentful. And that's not good for her, and it's not good for you, and it's not good for the relationship as a whole. So you need to have these times where you go off and just do your own thing, even though that might be inconvenient. Like, I have a 3-month-old son at the moment. You know, we just give him birth. You know, he's young at the moment. I have to be present.
Of course,
around, I have to be able to be their support. But sometimes, at least once a week, I need to go out and have my time on my own. Minimum, just go out for an hour or two and just do my own thing, completely away from the family. Like, because I work from home, right?
Okay.
You know, I have my own business and everything, so it's I work from here.
By the way, that analogy in itself is even good. If someone doesn't know anything about dating or women, just if you've ever worked from home, you very quickly learn it blurs, am I at home or am I at work? So you, even in that sense, you have to make boundaries, right? Like, I'll give you an example. I make myself have days off because I work from home, mate. If I don't, I'll just find myself during the day off thinking, I could quickly get this done though, couldn't I? It's like, bro, you're not at work right now. You have to think. So yeah, I agree. Like, all these boundaries are necessary in life, right?
Yeah, and that's something I struggle with. So it's
fair enough.
Like you said, there's always something that needs to be done. Like to you know, I just don't work every Sunday. That's just my
there you go.
I don't work every Sunday. Like, no matter what, there's nothing that I'll do for that. So and you know, you can do other things like, you know, creating a specific workspace.
Yes,
you know, I only work in this room, so like that, you still have some kind of like physical division that can make things easier. But I'll be honest, that's something that I do struggle with.
But to draw it into the bigger point, though, this is essentially what ideally you're going to craft in your space of the relationship. Like you say, there's going to be times where you, and your wife as well, by the way, obviously, there's going to be times where she can have a break and she can do something, or she can experience a different side of herself. Let's put it that way. Yeah,
absolutely. Like I'll always, like, at least once a week, I'll, you know, normally when the youngest is asleep, you know, my give opportunity for my wife to go do something for herself, whereas get her hair done, you know, whatever else it might be, some kind of feminine activity that you know, I don't want to do it. You know, I don't want to go with her when she's doing that, but it's refreshing for her. She needs that, and I have to give her the opportunity and space to do that as well. If that means, like, for that time, I've got to be the primary carer of the kids, of course. Like, that's what you've got to do, right? That's good for her. They're in this scenario, and it's good for the relationship as a whole.
By the way,
doing that all the time, you know, then that would be a problem. You know,
by the way, it's one thing I want to loop you back into that you addressed, like you touched on it briefly, but you didn't go too deep on it, was there's a point here that's an obvious parallel in the relationship, the real long-term relationship, to how people fuck up when they initially are talking to the women, which is, you nailed it earlier. There has to be, literally by definition, to be a man and to be masculine, there has to be a small amount of disagreeability at a minimum. Not least just to create tension, because that's the other thing these movies are going to completely fuck your mind with if you're a normal guy. You're going to think like, oh, so I'm supposed to say everything good. Like, no, that actually has... The problem is, again, think about the subcommunication. If all you're doing is sort of like, I agree, you're right, everything you say is right, you're brilliant, everything about you is brilliant, right? First of all, that isn't authentic. They're going to know you're sort of faking and you're just bowing to them, as it were. And then secondly, there's nothing alluring about that. Like, they want the idea, remember like the Beauty and the Beast example, they want someone who has a little bit of danger and strength and qualities they don't have, but then who's sort of like willing or has like space to bring them into the, but they're not just like bowing to them completely and saying, I'm nothing, I'm just going to lose myself in you, the woman. Like, to me, both on the dating side and the relationship side, that's another key mistake I feel like people make.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes from low self-worth, actually. Like a lot of, like, when you're always, you know, agreeing with someone else, what you're actually saying, or what you're sub-communicating, is that, like, I don't value my own opinion enough to give it.
Yes.
Like, or to follow through with it. And nobody wants someone like that. I'm sure, again, everyone listening to this will have that friend who's a bit of a dickhead, but you like him.
Yep.
There's something about him you like, even though he can be a bit of a prick.
I wish guys understood that women can have that same vibe with men they like. They don't get it though, do they? They really think that like the obvious example is, I think for real, Jack, that half the reason why the loser man does actually keep repeating those same stupid lines of like, women just like assholes, is because they also have a female friend who won't date them, by the way, who tells them, this bloody asshole. And the joke is, if you ever look at that and observe their actions, dude, they're into the asshole. They just wish he was slightly less of an asshole. And when you're sort of trying to communicate to them like, hey, I'm here, they're sort of telling you like, no, you're safe and not in any way an asshole or disagreeable. That's why you're my friend and I'm not dating you. But they're not going to verbally say it. But that is sort of like the dynamic you will find plays out. So all I'll say is, I'll give you a quick example from our work, mate. The same thing happened to me. When I came into the industry, I was just a fan like everyone else. And what I did was, because I wasn't confident, I would just be the most polite person to everyone in the industry. And what that meant was this, Jack, you'll know this. I was considered the dreaded label nice. Everyone just thought I was nice. Everyone sort of vaguely liked me. But as you can imagine, people didn't respect me. People didn't consider me a person of status. There was no danger or mystique about me. Whereas when I made this persona that I use as a vehicle to be able to be on camera and to give my opinions and to create interest and attention and conversation, tell you what, mate, a lot of people will say they don't like that, or will go, you're an asshole, or wow, how mean. But then, mate, part of it's like, dude, they're not saying that because they don't like it, though. They sort of vibe with it in a way. Like, they're sort of liking the idea I'm the designated asshole in this particular regard, or I'm willing to be cheeky, or I'm willing to dare that they might think I went too far. Like, if you just look at the words, you're going to think, wow, they're really, like, putting him down. Like, no, they're actually sort of telling you in a weird way they vibe, or maybe they even admire some of those qualities.
Yeah, it's a sign of respect. You can't be ignored, right?
Yes, exactly.
So it's there's nothing wrong with that. And, you refer to the guy who's being the nice guy who's, just friends with the girl who's dating the asshole. Is like, what you got to remember as well with girls like that is like, not all girls are really healthy themselves and have really great attachment styles and are really well-rounded and understand these things. And, the girl who always goes for the asshole probably has some problems herself.
Oh, no doubt. Yes.
The reason that she's going for that guy is because there's something in that unhealthy dynamic that actually attracts her. And if you then visualize all women as that one girl, because she's talking to you.
Yes.
And the reason she's talking to you, by the way, is because she's not getting one aspect of her needs met within the relationship, and therefore you're meeting those needs in a roundabout way. So she's using you, by the way. You need to understand that not all women are like that as well.
Yes.
Not just extrapolate from one bad woman that all women are.
I'd also say as well, mate, actually listen to what they're saying. Like, again, if you notice, I have a very sort of like, essentially what I do is before I judge the person, I try to actually see it from their perspective and try and think, why would they say it this way? Why would they do it that way? So first of all, just to throw this in there, because there'll be women who'll listen and think, what the fuck? When you say that the girl's using them, like, we all know the man in that case is also trying to use the woman and he wishes she'd sleep with him. Like there's a level of like disingenuous aspect to that damaged relationship anyway. But I would also say, if you listen to the woman, when the woman says the ultimate trigger for the loser man, she goes, men are trash. No, listen to her. What she's saying is all the men she's dating are trash. She's actually just telling you, I'm having problems like finding men that I would appreciate, or the men that I'm with, the dynamic. That she's not even making a statement about you. She's just making a statement about her own experience. Similarly, the other example, and I try to always give this because, again, it removes these stupid divisions, mate. So in the online space where people have made a political component of men versus women, there's a classic one, right, where the women go like, like men are so dangerous and toxic, and they rape people and they're just out for all the cynical. Guess what? If I was a woman who was a political activist and I was surrounded by male feminists, that's the vibe I'd have about men, because that's what some of those male feminists are like. They are a bit creepy and seem like there's an ulterior motive, and then you find out, wait, they weren't just here for a friend, and wow, they were just doing it for sex. Like, if you actually listen to these people, but you don't sort of include yourself, or as you say, tar everyone with the same brush, if you just think like, what are they sub-communicating? They actually tell you very reasonable things. Like, if you were the woman in that scenario, I'm sure you could come to that perspective and have the same experience and come to the same conclusion, right?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to, one of the things we mentioned earlier, that like when everything, your word, when it comes to word choice, and your choice of words and the way that you view the world is actually in a reflection of the way you view yourself and your own personal experiences with the world. Everything that people are, when people are saying things like this, it is classic projection. they're projecting out what their reality is. They're projecting out what they think about things, the way people have treated them. It's not actually necessarily an objective truth. Well, it definitely isn't an objective truth in that sense. It's telling you, they are literally, when people are saying things like that, they are telling you their experience. And if you learn to read these things, you will actually have a much better experience of life.
Absolutely.
Because you'll be able to figure out who are people who are not that healthy.
Yep.
And from a personal, selfish perspective, you shouldn't want to surround yourself with unhealthy people. Now, this is another problem that a lot of guys in this situation have, by the way, is they want to save people. They want to save women. She's in a bad situation with this bad, and I can be the one who saves her. And what you're actually doing there is you're creating an unhealthy strings attached dynamic. You're basically saying, I will save you, and in return, what? Right? You get sex. She becomes your girlfriend. You get your needs met. Whereas really what you want to do is you want to be in a position where you can healthily attract other healthy people. You surround yourself with other healthy people, and then you mutually get your needs met together in a healthy way. Because this is another problem a lot of guys have, is they think that there's something unhealthy or wrong about maybe having sexual desires or even wanting to escalate with a woman. But if you want, and it all comes down to intention. If you do want to just escalate with a woman, manipulate her into sleeping with her, that's wrong. But if your intention is to move things forward in a romantic footing, to hopefully have a relationship that's going to benefit you both, as you both get to have intimacy, you both get to be able to share your problems, you both get to have your sexual needs met, you both can create a family and create a new generation of healthy children who can improve the world, why wouldn't you do that and move things forward? It's not wrong. It's not creepy. It's all comes down to what are your intentions behind it. It's not a bad thing. If two people are cooperatively working together to make a relationship good, make a business, whatever it might be, that's a net good. And you're only going to be able to do that though with healthy people, and it's not your responsibility to fix them. It's everyone's. Now you can create a dynamic to make it easier for them. That doesn't mean you can help them. Maybe you can help them. Yeah, right. And you should try and create potential dynamics that make things healthier for people. This is a really abstract point of
no, it's good. Yeah. By the way, another thing go on.
I was just going to say that you can only really influence the people around you, and if you everything starts with yourself. Right? You are at the center of your universe, essentially. And everything starts with your relationship with yourself. And first things first, you have to get that right.
Yes.
And then you can start influencing people in your immediate circle, whether it's your close family, a relationship, or anything like that. And then from that, if you get that right, you have a healthy family, or you have a good relationship, and then you can have healthy children, and maybe you can influence your friends, and you can, over time, gradually move out. But the key is you first off have to get that core right, which is yourself and your relationship. And if you're with an unhealthy person, you're actually going to make more unhealthy dynamics around you. And it's the same if you don't fix your own problems as well. And obviously, no one's perfect, but it's about just having the core as good as you can. Right.
No, absolutely.
So there's a more abstract point here of that. If you want to help more people, you're better off kind of fixing yourself and then getting another healthy person to kind of influence the people around you than you are actually taking someone dysfunctional and trying to fix them. Now,
I would even say, mate, that it's just more effective what you're talking about. The difference is if you lecture someone or trick them, do this and this will be the outcome. Nah, not necessarily. Whereas, to me, the best possible, the most alluring reason to do something is someone and trust, has done it themselves, it's worked for them, and they're willing to share with you some of the secrets. Basically, like you say, if you fix your own insecurities, problems, what holds you back from being happy, satisfied, fulfilled, and then the person you're with, whether that's your lover, your brother, your friend, if they just start to notice it, then they're going to actually aspire to be like you. They're even going to want to know, how did you do it? Give me a few tips, or can I join you? And by the way, if you ever offer them, hey, come, it's like people know famously when working out, it's like this. If you have a fit friend who just says hey, come along to the gym with me, you don't have to start too hard. I'll start you on an easy thing. That's way more appealing than someone intimidating you, you're in fucking shit shape or whatever, that, one of them's appealing. One of them's it's a fucking ultimatum almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing about this is because ultimately people can only change themselves. You can't change them. So when you're leading by example and when you're shining a light, as it were, you're going to attract people who are then going to want to change themselves. So you're actually going to be successful. Whereas if you try and change people who don't want to change, that is literally the worst thing you can do.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's never going to happen, because like you have to lead by example and inspire them to change themselves. Like, there's all kinds of, corollaries from this way of thinking of the world, but, and the way that the world is currently run. But, really, that's, if you want to make meaningful change in your own life and other people's lives around you, that's the way to do it, which is to, circle us all back in. This is why getting your relationship to women right is so important.
Absolutely.
Because your wife, your lover, your girlfriend, that is the person you can influence most in your life.
Yes.
So if you really want to change the world, first off, change yourself, and then find someone to help change it with you. And you'll be able to hopefully, actually make meaningful.
Perfect.
At the very least within your family, if nothing else.
I'd even say as well, if you look at most people, and I definitely was in this position as well, when you haven't nailed the romantic aspect of relating to women, you can also become very extreme. Like, because you'll be desperate, suddenly all women become viewed through that lens. Whereas like that in itself is going to be mega unhealthy. Now you can't ever have a female friend. Now you can't ever have someone who maybe once you could have dated, but now you're not, and you're a different person in your life, but like you look after their kid, or you meet them, or they have some other activity. You are going to become the guy who seems creepy and weird, because not only are you almost framing yourself that way, but you're too desperate, you're too over eager, and it's so obvious what you're lacking in that sense, like and once you have that aspect resolved, now you're going to be able to know, like, right, I've got that part taken care of over here. I can interface with women in these totally other relationships elsewhere. That doesn't have to seem weird or like I'm a strange guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start it all comes back to the way you think about yourself and the world, and you can't help but project that out. If you think the world is full of misery and pain, and all women are terrible, you're gonna manifest that.
Oh, absolutely. You'll even find those people. I tell you, 100%. Yes.
Yeah, you'll find it. You'll create it.
Yes.
Because the world does have that. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it doesn't exist, but it's about the way you're exposing to it. You're almost kind of like bringing it into your life, or at least you're focusing on it, and it becomes the focus of your perception, right? Whereas if you have this view that, like you don't ignore reality, but you also understand there is also beauty to life. There's good women, there's good people, there's this chance to make a change, in a small way within your life, then you will just have a much better experience of life. You will just enjoy your life way more, which in and of itself is very, is a worthy reason to do it.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to make your life better. It's not selfish to want to do that. So it's really, really, it's really weird how these almost seemingly small beliefs can end up kind of like really poisoning the whole life as well. Especially when it comes to women, because, as I mentioned, as we talked about right in the beginning, it is central to the way that you view yourself and relate to yourself as a man.
I mean, one thing I would actually like to broach as like a little topic here as we start to close up, and I've got a few angles on it, is when you said earlier about the notion that men will also feel a shame of like, but I don't want to seem creepy or that's another area where you're listening to women, but you're not hearing what they're saying. What they're saying isn't any man who approaches me with any sexual dynamic or spark or dares to disagree with me or challenge me or seem a bit cheeky is an asshole and weird. What they're telling me is there's a certain type of man who's like that or who projects that behavior, and I don't like it. So all I'm saying to you is I don't like it. And spoiler, if you then decide to include yourself as you're that type of man, then I'm telling you, don't do it. That's why there are certain scenarios when you begin, when you're not very attuned to women and how they speak and how they behave, you're going to make faux pas and you're going to be silly and you're going to overstep the bounds. But spoiler, like I said earlier, the kind of man that actually they will be into, That's like essentially like the secret passcode he's supposed to know, which is like, that doesn't apply to me. She's talking about the other men. So there's an area, again, where men will get lost and they'll think, right, well, so by default, I don't ever want to seem creepy with, because there's another area I think people get lost in these dynamics. There's an enormous difference between how a man and a woman talk privately, even if it's in a public setting, but a private conversation, and how men and women talk about men and women publicly, where we're all judging it and having an opinion. And I think that is a massive barrier for men, because when you have this aspect, let's be real, the gist of it goes like this. The idea of having frank talk, like your dad, your brother, your uncle, your whatever, some father figure, mentor would have given you back in the day about how to approach women, talk to them, how women are. If you try that as a public conversation, no surprise, a lot of women are going to come along and shut that down and go, hey, what the hell is this? Like, this is like fucking creepy and weird and it's exploitative and you're labeling women and you're reducing them just to this aspect of things. And part of the reason why they're going to do that, guys, is, I mean, this is where I'm going to, again, try to go from this perspective, where I see it from the woman's perspective. They're thinking of the worst example of the guy who came up to them in a bar and spat some really obviously not slick, sleazy ass line, and then seemed like obnoxious, like he was LARPing as a guy who's confident and has all this shit together, but he isn't. He is some sort of guy trying to trick. They have this sense that he's trying to trick them. He's not legit. They don't want those people meeting you. They don't want like the idea that young men are encouraged to be like that. But the joke is, if they actually knew the positive sides of this, like if you could reframe it as, instead of like getting it's why if you notice they gravitate to hating the Andrew Tates of the world. That is the caricature of everything they hate. If instead we were talking about what you're doing, of the idea of like learn to communicate with women better, all these things, these are all great things. It's just, again, you can't explicitly say them. Like, I always give this analogy, Jack. To me, what women want in the relationship, it just seems to be how they interface with the world, is what you want as the viewer of a really awesome magic trick. You want to be tricked. You want it to really smoothly move from beginning to middle to end. And at the end, you don't want to know how it was done, but you want the awesome feeling that you got from going through the experience. If, as I was showing you the trick, I quickly paused and said, by the way, like, she's not even in this box. Like, that's a fake pair of legs. I'm going to spin her around. The whole trick collapses. And at the end, you would just think, oh, so it's just a trick then. You almost want, like, the mystique of the experience. So to me, the fact that women don't, like, essentially only communicate verbally, explicitly, is actually, it's even good for them. It seems to be, it gets them the result they want, which is the guy comes along who doesn't have to say it, he shows it. They don't have to tell them, by the way, I'm going to support you and I'm correct. His actions show these things. Yeah. Even the sense that he's not intimidated by when she pushes back with a shit test. Wow, that just bounced off him. Maybe he's a secure guy who has good relationship. This is all implicit, like we've said. So the problem is, if you're a man, initially you're going to seem totally lost. But once you start to key into this stuff, like, it's not even that sinister that they try and shut the talk down, mate. And also, spoiler, if you've never looked into the way women talk to women, they haven't designed this for men, guys. They've been doing this the whole time themselves, tone policing, what the vibe is, the idea that, yeah, it's true, but you shouldn't have said it. Loads of that's within the women's world anyway. They're doing that to each other all the time. That's not specific to us, guys. So I feel like people get way too put off by the online discourse, as it were, mate. Like, the way you relate to the individual woman, you almost throw that stuff out the window. You're not going to be thinking about, like, how would I be judged by, a different woman who wouldn't date me, but was going to decide if I'm creepy or I'm the okay. Get that shit out of your mind. It's going to be poison, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, it's like the idea of playing to a crowd.
Yes.
You're always gonna, everything you say. Yeah, it all comes down to what we're talking about. It's the context you're saying it. Like saying one thing in one context might be the worst thing in the world to say, and then saying it in another context makes someone laugh. It's
why every sext looks really creepy, because we're not the two people in the relationship. We don't know the dynamic. And obviously there's a really vulnerable private things that are being said. So it doesn't matter, even if it is Leonardo DiCaprio, mate, it's going to look creepy when his sext comes out, because it's going to be him saying something weird that he's into with this girl. We're not them,
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you never want to, it's private. It's vulnerable. Yes. It's private. It's a shared experience between two people in that moment who have relaxed into trust of each other. And like, you're not within that boundary of trust. So it's gonna seem weird or awkward or, of course, naturally. It's the same way you overhear, you eavesdrop in a conversation of two people talking. I didn't really want to hear that. It makes me feel uncomfortable. It's because it's not meant for you. It's just meant for them. They have all this shared experience, this shared these shared feelings, the experiences that they've gone through together that frame what they're saying. You know, it's private and should be kept so, which is, you know, another reason why social media can be pretty bad as well. Just on final, you know, don't want to veer off onto another tangent, but I'm, you know, when people start playing out their relationships on social media,
sure,
suddenly like you don't understand the dynamic.
No, absolutely. Yeah. By the way, another thing I wanted to ask you about was, I thought a last topic we could do, because it sort of mirrors the first topic, but it puts a nice cherry on the cake, as it were, is sure, the other aspect of what people do, and this is definitely something people in the pickup artist community also do to try and like provoke men to be the kind of customer they want, is the notion that you are the mark if you get married, if you have the long-term relationship, like you're the sucker. Like the idea was, they presented as, you can think of some of the names we've mentioned, the women's game is to trap you into the marriage, and the men's game is to get just fuck and have as much promiscuous sex as possible, and as the man, you're supposed to sort of never give in, and you're supposed to keep playing the game, as it were, and then let's see who wins the game. Does the woman get you in the end, and you know she tricked you, or do you keep tricking them and sleeping with? That's like the way people, even pickup artists, present it as. Whereas to me, as I said, if you follow through the experiences we've talked about here, and the dynamics and the things you learn, and what you eventually learn you need in your life, and what other people need, and what a satisfying relationship is, one of the end goals is an awesome long-term relationship. Like, that isn't the trap. In fact, I'll even phrase it this way, because I often use this analogy. It's not one I came up with, by the way. You know, when people say that stupid thing where they go, 50% of all marriages lead to divorce anyway, so then the woman takes everything you have. It's like, one, guys, you can literally have billions, and if you have no woman and you're a heterosexual man, you will feel poor. You have nothing. You just have the money at that point. So losing the money is not even a big deal if it's worth the risk. And what I would say is this. One, 50-50 is not even that bad, guys. Flip a coin, you might be the one who succeeds, and then I'll just say this finally.
It's not even 50%.
It's not, I know, but
it's one of the, yeah.
I'll even go further though and say this. Bear in mind, what we're talking about in this convo isn't just about women. It's about leveling yourself up, becoming who you want to be, and becoming a more confident, secure person. Spoiler, you're not going to be in the 50% that fails. You're going to be the 50 or 20% that succeeds. Like, that's the other thing. Have the winner's mindset. You're going to be the one who makes it. And as is the key point to make, what's the alternative? Just don't ever date women, ever. That ain't an alternative, guys. I'm telling you, that alternative leads to everything you don't want.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not even 50%. It was projected to go up to 50% in like the 1970s.
Right.
And that figure started.
They just keep spamming that number though, yeah.
Yeah, it peaked out at something like 42%. And first time marriages, it's something like the divorce rate's only 25%.
Oh, that's pretty good then. Especially in the modern day. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Your odds are pretty good, man. It's just one of those, again, you know, whatever the reasons are for this repeating of, you know, sometimes these kind of phrases get lodged in the collective hype.
What do you think about that angle, though, that people make it sound like you've been tricked if you're the one who gets married, etc.? What do you think on that angle?
Well, it goes back to projection and talking about what we talked about before. The guys who are saying that are guys who have been through that experience and then are projecting out their experience on every divorce, and every marriage. Generally, like I know some of these guys behind the scenes, and you know, some of the big red pill names, and I know their friends and stuff, and they, you know, these are guys that you don't want to, you know, you when it comes to life advice, you do not want to separate the message from the messenger. You actually do want to listen to the messenger. You do want to view the way that they're living their life, like, because if you're taking their advice, they should have what you want.
Yes.
And they should be able to live in alignment with what they want and be in a good position. If they are, you know, a guy who's been divorced 3 times and never had a meaningful relationship and never had, you know, something, you know, has been divorce raped and lost all that, you know, 50% of everything and has been really bitter about it and gone through a really bad divorce. Yeah, of course they're going to be negative about marriage. It's understandable in their situation, honestly. But should you therefore listen to someone in that position and listen to their advice on women as a whole? Depends how reflective they are. Depends if they have a genuine experience on it, where they're saying, you know, actually, like, I have friends who were in really good marriages and they were really happy actually, but my experience of marriage was, for whatever reason it went wrong and I lost all my money and I had a really bad divorce case and she didn't want to let me see my kids. You know, these are all real issues.
Oh, of course.
To men.
Yes.
You know, they're serious things and you shouldn't want that to happen. But instead of just avoiding marriage altogether, why don't you try and lay the foundation that means that won't happen? Why don't you get good at communicating with women? Why don't you create a good model for a relationship? Understand what she wants. Make sure that you're not marrying a dysfunctional woman who's only interested in your money. These are all things that you can avoid. These are all things, skills you can learn, things that you can do. And, that's what I would recommend in that situation, rather than just swearing off women and swearing off marriage.
Yes.
And, it's a reflection of their own experience, I think, in most cases, unfortunately.
Yeah, actually, the type of pickup artist you're talking about, or man in general, I would actually say one of their problems is they did make a transformation, but they just stopped at the first stage and decided there was nothing more. So what happened, like you're saying, is
the life raft.
Yeah, they probably had a long-term relationship. It went really badly. So what they did was they thought, right, well, what I need to do is I have to be the guy who has the choice of all the women. I'm going to learn these pickup skills. I'm going to date loads of women, but I'm not going to get trapped in that relationship again. And what they do then is, like you say, they project whoever their wife was onto everyone, and they actually get stuck. My analogy would be like, it's sort of the infantile dream of a superhero comic. You're a nerdy little kid, but if you had the powers, you could beat up all the bullies. But what you don't realize is this: if you actually got the powers and were Superman, you'd be a bit of a dickhead if you went around beating up school kids. Like, at that point, you wouldn't need to. You're Superman. You've transcended it. Like, why not have the most awesome experience without anyone beating you up? So yeah, the analogy I would give would be, they make it sound like that's all that's possible. Like, as you say, like the best goal is they're just sleeping with women and they never get in the relationship. Whereas realistically, like, you have to understand in that particular case, like, that was just one set of experiences you had. And if you level up as well, first of all, you're just not going to get targeted by the same people, and you're going to select differently, like we're talking about. You remember, there's the other, I guess we can tie it into this. That's why also movies do lie to you, that it's just about the feeling of love. Because if you let yourself get into, if you ignore a million red flags, eventually the feeling of love can come with totally the wrong person, and you're going to ruin each other's lives. If instead you sort of were more attuned and well balanced as you got into the initial relationship, you just would stop when it was someone that you saw had these crazy red flags that we're talking about. They're really damaged. They're probably going to act out their own traumas on you. Like, you wouldn't have gone that far. You wouldn't have sort of trapped yourself in the relationship. Because there's the other thing. You trap yourself, guys. Let's be real. Yeah. I always think as a man, the ultimate position always is, even if it's not your fault, it's your responsibility. If you get that line, you get everything about being a man, in my opinion.
Yeah. Absolutely agreed. It's, the exact same line as one I often use with guys in these situations. It's like, you could have done something different not to lead to that situation. And even that can be really tough for people to hear and understand. But that's ultimately what being a man is. Like, I think being a man is being, falling victim to occasional bouts of pride, making mistakes, but then actually learning from it. Pride comes before the fall for a reason.
Yes.
Like, a lot of these guys, when they get these kind of women, they're pretty happy about it at the time. But there's something underlying that can be a problem, that can be changed. You can always change your situation. You might not be able to change everything about it, but you always have some degree of choice. You always do have some other path that you can take. Whether it's feasible or not is another question. But then you have to come to peace with that as well, which is.
By the way, another thing about your career, we could maybe this is a good final point, and I'll ask. So, this could be the last question, essentially. What I would say is this: one of the reasons I picked you as the specific person in this sphere to do this particular interview with, I've also done an interview that was vaguely overlapping with someone who also, his whole thing is like, he teaches you how to be a dad, basically, and how to be a husband. Like, he's not even trying to do the dating aspect. His angle's more like, how to keep romancing your wife when you have her and keep her interesting, keep things, so it's a different perspective. But the overlap here is this: it's actually because you openly advertise, I am a dating coach, but I am a husband and father. Now, there's another red flag, guys. You'll know this. There are really famous people in the pickup artist community who are fathers, husbands, and in relationships, but because their gimmick is, I'm going to sell you this cheap sex promiscuous angle, they don't admit it. They pretend they're still the bachelor. They pretend they're still talking to women. I mean, some of them, you even see it in the videos. All they do is the pickup part, then the camera turns off and they don't date the woman and sleep with her because they actually don't want that anymore in their life, but they're stuck appealing to an infantile crowd. Whereas to me, the fact that you admit you're a husband is because that's the sort of customer you want, the kind of person you're trying to help. Isn't the person who needs to believe like the childhood dream of like, I'm never going to get trapped to be. You're trying to show the person, I'm going to teach you the skills to meet the woman. And then once you do, it's like we were talking about earlier, look at the outputs on my life. The outputs are what you want. You want a long-term relationship. You want to be respected by a woman, have a great life. I've got that. So I can clue you in on it a bit, right? There's another thing, as you said, don't take advice from anyone you wouldn't want to in some way be or be like.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at people who are living in alignment with their values. It all comes down to that. Like, if you're not, if I, based on my view for life, like even in the corner that I've gone into in terms of dating specifically as opposed to relationships, it's like if you're not living in alignment with what you believe, also it would eat away at me. Like,
yes,
if I was, I have in the past had guys who have, not necessarily followed my advice, or like I attracted a different kind of customer when I first started, doing this before I kind of really dialed in, my own messaging and everything else, the way that I'm going to talk about these things. As I transitioned out of the more kind of hardcore red pill stuff as well, it's like you end up kind of feeling like you're not doing what you want to do. And I'm sure these guys feel that. And that eats away at you as an individual, which is not a healthy place to be in, for any man in any situation. If you're not living in alignment with the way that you view the world and your values, it's just another general piece of advice for guys. You're gonna eventually feel crap about yourself. Your self-image is going to go through the roof, not through the roof, through the floor. It's going to completely be destroyed. And you're going to end up in a bad situation. So, but the first thing is you've got to actually articulate what are your values. That's the thing, and that's the hard part. Actually, the hard part's not. I mean, it can be hard living in alignment with your values, but I think for most people, they just don't have a clearly articulated set of values.
They just haven't thought about it enough. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Which is, it's one of the things I do with guys is like, let's figure this out for you, because generally the guys that want to work with me are people who have these kind of values that want a relationship for obvious reasons, because that's what I kind of signal to people. But like, I'm also not telling you what's the right or wrong thing to do. I want you to figure that out for yourself. I want you to, like, I'm going to give you my advice, but I'm going to say, there's also this other perspective. And I'm not saying either of them is right or wrong. It's up to you to really figure that out for you. And that's also a big difference between someone who's got your best interests at heart and wants you to actually become, a best version of yourself, versus someone who maybe just wants to, milk you or just kind of fit you into a mold and just kind of churn it out. And, if you're in any kind of situation where you are looking for some kind of coach or some kind of mentor, whether it be fitness, or it be relationships, or it be mindset, business, whatever it might be, you need to find someone. You're going to have the best results with someone like that, who wants to do what's right for you and doesn't have a preconceived set of notions of what you should or shouldn't do. And you should find yourself naturally attracted to people with similar kind of values and ideas on life, but you will never be the same as someone. And in fact, if you find yourself in that position where you are like, I 100% agree with everything this guy says, that's probably a bit of a warning sign as well. Yes, they're telling you what you want to hear, not necessarily what's the right thing for you in that moment. So that's just a general piece of advice. And, for looking for coaching or mentorship in any field, they're the kind of people you really want. And like Duncan said at the beginning, it's like there's good and bad in every field. So just use a bit of judgment.
Yes. And by the way, being as you obviously do literally offer this service, if people don't know, if they go to your Twitter, which will obviously be in the description box, you will have a free guide there that gives a few techniques and a few things to think about and things to mentally frame around, like how to have conversation. Obviously, you do offer coaching yourself. And I'll say this as well, just like I stressed that you actually advertise that you're a husband, one of your taglines is that you help people find women without relying on dating apps or nightclubs. So I'll even say, Jack is not offering the traditional thing of like, here's the pickup line, or here's the canned line you're going to use, or here's the little game you're going to play. He's actually helping you potentially meet women in real life, real women, that the kind of women you want to have the date with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like ultimately, if you want to, it's about quality over quantity, right? It's much easier. And like, even in my own, my own kind of marketing or with my own clients, when people get dates and they get numbers, it's great. It's a hard evidence. Look, they're having success where they didn't have them before. But that's useless. If you want a long term, it's not useless at all, because you literally have to date people to get into a relationship. But like, you have to try and find someone that you're actually going to, last with. So there's no use getting 20 dates with 20 women who you don't care about, or going to nightclubs and only dating, club skanks. If you want something meaningful, it's just not where you're going to find them. Generally, it's not like only club skanks go to clubs, but generally the people who are going to, you meet someone in a club, it's probably going to be a hookup. It's not going to lead to something
Yes.
serious. And the people you're going to hook up with are the people who probably aren't looking for something serious. So it's not going to be placed.
And they might just put you in that box of it's just a one night stand anyway. So even if they would in real life, if they'd have met you in a coffee shop, have had a convo, maybe they only want to have sex with you in that scenario, right? You've sort of allowed yourself to be objectified.
Yeah, exactly. So it's about doing it in a more healthy way that's in alignment with actually finding a relationship that's right for you through becoming the best, most attractive version of yourself. Because, you know, one of the things we've alluded to, but we've never talked about, is that men instinctively know how to do this. If we didn't know how to do it, as you said, like the human race would be extinct. You know how to do it. It's just about showcasing the best version of yourself, your own natural charm, finding out, you know, becoming aware of your self-sabotaging things, becoming, you know,
basically a lot of it's getting out your own way, right?
Yeah, a lot of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's the other thing. When I wasn't the confident guy and I couldn't speak, I used to think like, wow, it must be incredible to be like that. The joke is it's just not having things like fear get in your way. It's not that you don't have fear, it just doesn't get in your way. And as you say, once you do it, it's almost unconscious. Like it's actually very natural to want to talk. Think about it. You have a natural thing in your brain and your like hormone system that enjoys talking to women, getting a reaction from them, seeing the light in their eyes, that they're loving it, getting a vibe, you're getting that feeling of attraction. It's actually a very natural process once you remove the unnatural barriers, as it were, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's capable of doing it. It's not some mystical lost art. I'm not going to teach you some, you know, the hidden tricks that the Tibetan monks have been keeping secret for the past 2,000 years. No, it's all instinctive and instinctual, and being able to do it in a way that feels comfortable for you and gets the results that you want, which hopefully is to get in a position to get into a relationship. But it's no gimmicks, and sometimes it can be tough. I'm not going to sell you like it's going to be easy. You know, a lot of it's going to be some intrinsic looks in the mirror and figuring out exactly what it is that you want from life, and, you know, facing mistakes that you've done, facing problems that you have, and being able to not be limited by those, not let them limit you forever. And yeah, it should become a lasting change that also bleeds over into other areas of your life as well, by the way. Once you start getting this, you know, good communication styles, being more comfortable with yourself, talking to women, you become more comfortable with yourself in every situation. And it bleeds over. I'm sure you had the similar thing. It bleeds over into your professional life, your personal life, your friendships, the way you view yourself, the way that you just carry yourself in the street gets, you know, it changes. So that's the position you want to get to, not just, oh, I managed to manipulate a woman into sleeping with me twice, and actually I feel a bit shit about myself.
Absolutely, yes.